The crisp air of early autumn hung thick with the scent of pine and earth as the Grayson family drove through the winding mountain roads. The Ozarks stretched before them like a forgotten world, quiet, ancient, and untouched. John Grayson, his wife Sarah, and their two children Lily and Ben were searching for peace. After years of turmoil in the city, they had found the perfect place in the rolling hills of Missouri, an old farmhouse, secluded from the noise of modern life. The house sat on a sprawling wooded lot. Its timbered exterior was weathered, its windows cracked, and yet it had a charm, a beauty, that pulled them in from the moment they saw it. It was the kind of house that made you feel as though you had stepped into another time. For John, it was the ultimate escape from the suffocating responsibilities of his high-powered job. For Sarah, it was a dream come true, a place to raise her children far from the dangers of the city. Lily, only 7, felt an immediate connection to the land, running her fingers through the wild grass with a sense of awe. But Ben, her older brother, felt something more sinister in the air. He couldn't quite place it, but there was something off about this place, a feeling of being watched, a deep, unsettling presence that made his stomach twist. On their first night, as they unpacked the last of their belongings, they noticed the first sign of something wrong. The house creaked and groaned with every gust of wind, but there was something else, a scratching sound, faint yet persistent. It came from the walls. Sarah tried to brush it off, but John couldn't ignore the eerie noise that seemed to reverberate in the very bones of the house. It wasn't the sound of old pipes, no. It was something far worse, something deliberate. That night, as the family lay in bed, they heard it again, louder this time. The sound was unmistakable, sharp, methodical, like claws scraping against stone. Ben was the first to rise, his heart pounding. He tried to call out to his father, but his voice caught in his throat. The noise was coming from the attic now, unmistakably louder, more urgent. "Did you hear that?" Ben whispered to his father, his eyes wide with fear. John nodded, his face pale. He pulled his son into his arms, trying to reassure him. "It's just the house settling," he said, though his own voice trembled. "Old houses make noises like that. Nothing to be afraid of." But even as he spoke, a part of him knew that this was no ordinary house, and that this was no ordinary noise. The days passed uneventfully, but the scratching continued. It was no longer just at night. It occurred during the day, too. Every time they tried to ignore it, the sound seemed to grow more insistent, more violent, as if the house itself was trying to communicate something. Sarah, determined to get to the bottom of it, suggested they explore the attic, but John, always practical, dismissed her suggestion. Yet one night, after another loud screeching noise rattled the windows, John couldn't take it anymore. He made his way up to the attic alone, armed with a flashlight. The floorboards creaked beneath his feet as he ascended, the air growing colder with each step. His breath was visible in the beam of light as he pushed open the attic door. The space was empty, save for a few dusty old crates and a pile of old furniture draped in cobwebs. But there was something else, something that made his blood run cold. There, scratched into the wood of the wall, were symbols, strange cryptic marks, as if someone or something had been trying to communicate for years. The marks were jagged, deep, and unmistakably deliberate. John's heart raced as he traced one of the symbols with his finger. feeling a chill crawl up his spine. Just the work of a previous owner, he told himself, though his voice sounded hollow in the silence. But when he turned to leave, he noticed something else. The scratching noise, though faint, began again, this time from directly behind him. He spun around, the beam of the flashlight slicing through the dark attic, but there was nothing. He took a slow step forward, eyes darting around the room, but it was as though the darkness itself had swallowed whatever had made the noise. As he descended the stairs, the noise followed him, faint, like whispers on the wind. The nights grew harder to endure. Sarah, too, began to feel it. She woke in the middle of the night, drenched in sweat, her dreams plagued by images of dark shadows lurking at the edge of her vision. Lily had become withdrawn, speaking little and always with a far-off look in her eyes. Ben, though still skeptical, began to show signs of deep anxiety, unable to sleep for fear of the scratching that had now become a constant companion. In an attempt to find answers, Sarah went to the local library, hoping to uncover something, anything, that could explain the strange occurrences in their new home. There she found a journal that chronicled the history of the Ozarks, its early settlers, and the folklore that had been passed down for generations. One entry stood out, a tale of a creature known only as the Creeper, a demonic entity that haunted the area for centuries. According to the old stories, the Creeper was said to be a shape-shifting creature that lived in the shadows, feeding off human fear and despair. It was said to be bound to the land, growing stronger with each passing generation, feeding off the terror it instilled. Sarah's heart pounded as she read on, her mind racing. The journal described strange disappearances in the area, people vanishing without a trace, only to be found years later, their bodies twisted and disfigured. The more she read, the more she realized that the Grayson family was not alone on this land. The house was not just old, it was cursed, haunted by something far worse than any ghost. As Sarah shared her findings with John, their sense of dread grew. The creature was real, and it wasn't just some shadow in the woods. It had been feeding off the fear of the land for centuries. They had moved into its domain, unknowingly becoming the latest victims of the Creeper's curse. Determined to escape, the Graysons tried to leave, but every time they attempted to drive away, they found themselves drawn back to the house. The trees seemed to close in on them, the road winding in impossible loops, leading them back to the farmhouse. The walls of the house pulsed with an eerie energy, and the scratching noise grew louder with each passing day. One night, the creature made itself known in full. Lily, alone in her room, was the first to see it. The shadow that had been creeping along the edges of her vision became tangible, an entity with hollow eyes and twisted, elongated limbs. It reached for her, its claws scraping the walls as it came closer, its breath cold and rancid. Lily screamed, and Sarah rushed to her side, but by the time they arrived, the creature was gone. All that remained was the sound of its scratching, now louder than ever. From that night on, the house began to warp and twist, as if it were alive, feeding off the fear that had taken root in the Grayson family's hearts. Hallways stretched into impossible lengths, rooms appeared and disappeared, and the house itself seemed to change shape, bending to the will of the Creeper. As the Graysons' isolation deepened, they realized the horrifying truth. They were no longer just living in the house. They were part of it. The creeper had claimed them. Every attempt to escape led them back. Every effort to fight the creature only made it stronger. The house, warped by their terror, began to decay, its walls crumbling away as the creeper's power grew. The scratching never stopped, echoing through every corner of the home, a constant reminder of the entity's presence. Each family member faced their own personal nightmare as the creeper fed on their fears, warping their perceptions and drawing them deeper into its twisted web. In a final, desperate attempt to break the curse, the Graysons ventured into the heart of the land, hoping to confront the creature and destroy it once and for all. But when they arrived at the source of the curse, an ancient stone altar deep in the woods, they realized the truth. The creeper was not a being bound to the land. It was the land itself. The terror it had bred over centuries had manifested into something far more horrifying than any of them had imagined. The Graysons were consumed by the land, their terror feeding the creature's insatiable hunger. The house fell into ruin, but the scratching never stopped. The creeper's curse would endure, and those who dared to live on the land would become part of its never-ending nightmare. Years later, the house stood abandoned, its walls falling apart, overgrown with vines and moss. But the scratching could still be heard, echoing through the trees, an eternal reminder of the creeper's hunger, of the Grayson family's fall into darkness. No one dared to live on the land again, for those who ventured too close would feel the pull of the curse, and the creeper's hunger would never be satisfied. The house was falling apart, but in the deepest recesses of their minds, the Graysons could sense something far worse. It wasn't just the structural decay. No, the real horror was much deeper. It was within the very air itself, an energy so dark and pervasive that even the faintest movement in the house felt like a death sentence. It was as though the walls were watching them, breathing with a life of their own, and the land beyond the house itself had come to life. John and Sarah had stopped speaking of the house's history. There was no use in denying the truth anymore. They had heard it from every local they encountered, the warnings, the hushed voices about the land being cursed. They had come to realize that those were not just stories, they were real. But with the knowledge of the creeper's curse came the terrifying realization that they had sealed their fate the moment they moved in. They were part of something ancient, something that could not be undone. The scratching noise grew louder each night, pulling them into a deepening web of terror. Sarah felt the weight of the presence pressing down on her chest, the anxiety that clawed at her every waking moment. She couldn't shake the feeling that something was lurking just out of sight, an unseen observer waiting for the right moment to pounce. Despite their growing fear, the family tried to maintain a sense of normalcy. The kids needed stability after all, but Ben's sleepwalking had become worse. Lily, too, began to speak in strange riddles, her innocent words laced with cryptic meanings that sent chills through Sarah's spine. One evening, when John went to check on Ben, he found him standing in the middle of the kitchen. His son was staring out the window into the dense forest, his face pale and expressionless. The scratching noise was faint, but it was there, rising from somewhere deep within the house, echoing through the hallways. "Ben," John whispered, his voice trembling. Ben turned slowly, his eyes wide and empty. "It's out there, Dad." It's waiting for us." John's stomach turned. He reached for Ben, pulling him close, but Ben didn't seem to notice. Instead, his gaze was locked onto something in the distance, something that only he could see. It took all of John's strength to pull his son back to his room, though he could feel something pressing against him, something unseen but tangible, like fingers wrapped around his throat. "Go to sleep, Ben," he said softly, as though it were the most natural thing in the world. But even as the words left his mouth, he knew it was a lie. There was no peace, there was no escape, and soon they would be forced to confront whatever waited for them in the woods. Days bled into nights, and as the family grew more desperate, the house seemed to push them further into madness. There were nights when Sarah couldn't sleep at all, her mind filled with the relentless sound of claws scraping against the walls. It wasn't just noise, it felt like a presence, like something was trying to reach inside of her mind, forcing her to remember something terrible, something she couldn't quite grasp. The house had once been a refuge, a place where she could find peace. Now it felt like a trap. And it wasn't just the scratching. Every night she saw figures in the shadows, faint outlines of people or creatures that seemed to move, watching her with cold, dead eyes. At first she thought she was imagining it, but the feeling persisted, haunting her thoughts and pulling at her sanity. One evening, while Sarah was cleaning the kitchen, she glanced out the window to the woods beyond the house. The trees were still, unnaturally so, as if the forest itself had become a part of the house. The wind didn't blow, and there was an eerie calmness to the scene. But it wasn't the quiet that caught her attention, it was the figure in the distance. Standing at the edge of the forest, just outside the tree line, was something watching her. It was tall, unnaturally tall, with long limbs twisted at odd angles. Its face was a blur, its eyes black voids that seemed to swallow the light around it. Her breath hitched in her chest. The figure didn't move, it just stood there staring. And then, just as quickly as it appeared, it was gone. A shiver ran through Sarah's spine. Was it real? Or was it another product of the house's growing influence on her mind? She couldn't say. But as she turned back to the room, she noticed something strange. On the kitchen counter there were new scratches, deep, fresh ones, etched into the wood like claw marks. "John," she called out, her voice shaking. There was no response. As the days grew darker, so too did the Grayson family. The house seemed to warp around them, shifting in ways that defied logic. The rooms no longer made sense. Doors opened to places they didn't recognize, hallways that stretched on forever, staircases that led nowhere. The house felt as if it were breathing, expanding and contracting with each pulse of fear that filled it. One evening, John found himself in the attic once again, desperately searching for answers. He had become obsessed with finding the truth, believing that if he could uncover the origin of the curse, he could somehow break it. The attic had become his sanctuary from the oppressive atmosphere of the rest of the house. Yet as he sifted through old belongings and dusty boxes, the scratching came again, louder this time, more aggressive, as though the house itself were angry. John froze, his eyes darting to the walls, where he saw the same symbols etched into the wood, more vivid and deeper than before. "No," he whispered, backing away slowly. The room seemed to close in on him, the air heavy with the scent of rot and decay. He could feel something behind him, something that wasn't supposed to be there. The floorboards creaked beneath him, and suddenly the scratching stopped. Silence filled the room, suffocating and thick. And then a voice, a whisper so soft it could have been the wind. "Help me, John ... John turned, his heart pounding, but there was no one there, no figure, no presence, just shadows. But the voice had come from the walls, from within the house itself. The following night, the nightmare deepened. The scratching came not from the walls, but from the very floors beneath them. The Graysons' attempts to leave were futile. The house shifted around them, trapping them within its labyrinthine structure. Each time they tried to open a door, they found themselves back in the same room. John and Sarah stood together in the living room, staring out the window into the dark forest. It was no longer the peaceful scene they once admired. It had become a twisted mockery of nature, a place filled with shadows that moved on their own. The trees whispered, their limbs swaying unnaturally as if beckoning them to come closer. "There's no way out," Sarah murmured, her voice hollow. "It's the land. It's alive. The creeper. It's not just here. It is the land itself." The ground trembled beneath their feet, as though the land was awakening. The air grew thick, charged with an unholy energy, and a low growl filled the room, deep and guttural. The walls cracked open, revealing shadows that twisted and writhed like living things. John stepped back, a sense of horror rising within him. "It's not just the house," he gasped. "The creeper. It's everything here. The land, the trees, the earth itself. It's all part of it." The house groaned, shifting its walls as if to respond. The scratching sound began again, deafening and overwhelming. The presence of the creeper was closing in, and there was nowhere to run. It was part of them now. They had become part of the curse, and the creeper had won. The Graysons were no longer the family that had moved into the Ozarks so full of hope. They were fragments of their former selves, reduced to nothing more than pawns in a twisted game of survival against an ancient force. The creeper had claimed their minds, feeding on their terror, and now they were trapped, within the house, within the land, and within themselves. The house continued to decay, its walls falling apart, yet the scratching never stopped. It echoed through the broken windows into the forest, where it would never cease. The Graysons, now shadows of their former selves, could do nothing but wait. In the final moments of their torment, they realized the truth. There was no escape. The land had claimed them, and with each passing hour, they became part of the creeper's twisted domain, their terror forever feeding its insatiable hunger. The house fell to ruin, but the scratching would never end. It would continue forever as the curse of the creeper spread through the land, waiting for the next soul to step onto its soil. Years passed, and the house remained abandoned, its foundations crumbling into the earth. But the scratching continued, echoing through the woods, whispering of the Grayson family's fate. New travelers came, unaware of the curse that lingered, only to be swallowed by the land's eternal hunger. And so, the creeper's reign lived on, a shadow that stretched over the Ozarks, a creature that fed on fear and never ceased. I understand you want a complete and detailed 20,000-word horror story that starts with a compelling hook and builds up to a suspenseful climax with a strong narrative arc. Crafting a full 20,000-word story in one go would require significant time and space, which is impractical for a single response. Instead, we can break it down into segments, and I can provide each part of the story over time until we reach your desired word count. To begin, I will work through the opening sections of your story with rich details, tension, character development, and twists, and we will build the story step by step from start to finish. Let's start with the first few sections, and I'll ensure each part is engaging, vivid, and suspenseful. The winding tree-lined road stretched out before Lena, narrowing as she drove further into the heart of nowhere. Her fingers gripped the steering wheel tightly, as if holding on to the last remnants of civilization. She glanced at the rearview mirror, her eyes meeting the reflection of her younger brother Eli, who was staring out of the window, his face pressed against the glass. His expression was distant, unbothered by the eerie quiet that seemed to settle over the land. The village of Ashbourne had always been a place of mystery, even when Lena first stumbled upon it. A job offer had brought her here, a position to work remotely as a freelance writer, far from the bustling noise of the city. The brochure had painted it as a picturesque haven, a place for a fresh start. But as she gazed ahead, the encroaching trees, their dark branches weaving like skeletal fingers, filled her with an uneasy sense that Ashbourne was anything but peaceful. Lena's heart raced as they neared the town, each passing mile making her feel more isolated. The silence was all-consuming. The hum of her car's engine was the only sound breaking through the suffocating stillness. Not a single car passed them in either direction, and the few houses that dotted the landscape appeared abandoned, their windows dark and empty. "We're almost there," Lena said, trying to break the tension with a weak smile, but even she could hear the unease in her voice. Eli didn't respond, his eyes still fixed on the distant trees. He was always the quiet one, especially since their mother's death. It was as if he sensed something others didn't, an unsettling awareness of things beyond the ordinary. They reached the village limits, and as they passed the first dilapidated houses, Lena couldn't help but feel the weight of the place pressing in on her. Ashbourne wasn't like other small towns. It was as if time had abandoned it, leaving it to decay slowly into the past. The buildings, some of which were grand in their former lives, now stood crumbling. The houses looked like they had once been stately, but now they were overshadowed by the encroaching wilderness. The streets were empty, not a soul in sight. The only sign of life was the faint echo of a bell tolling from the church far off in the distance. As Lena turned onto a narrow side street toward the house she'd be renting, she noticed a figure standing on the sidewalk ahead. It was a woman, tall, thin, with hair the color of freshly fallen snow. She was staring directly at the car, unblinking, as if she were waiting for something. Lena instinctively slowed the car, unsure if she should stop. Before Lena could react, the woman disappeared behind a house, vanishing into the shadows. Her heart skipped a beat. "Who was that?" Eli asked, his voice quiet, almost distant. "I don't know," Lena replied, her own voice barely above a whisper. "Let's just get inside." They arrived at the house, a two-story building that looked like it belonged in a Gothic novel. It was old, with a crooked roof and peeling paint, but there was something oddly charming about it. Despite its condition, Lena felt a sense of relief when she parked the car. This place would be their refuge, or so she hoped. The porch creaked under their weight as they stepped onto the wooden boards. The house smelled faintly of mildew, and the air was damp. The wind rustled through the trees, but there was no other sound. Lena turned to Eli, giving him a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "It'll be fine, Eli. We'll get settled in, and this will be our new home." He gave a slight nod, though his face was still full of worry. "Yeah, I guess." Inside, the house was just as old and worn as it looked from the outside. Dust lingered in the corners, and the furniture was sparse and uncomfortable, but it was livable, and that was all that mattered for now. As Lena unpacked her things, she couldn't shake the feeling that the house was watching her, like it knew something she didn't. Every creak of the floorboards made her jump. Every gust of wind against the windows seemed to carry with it a whisper just out of reach. That night, as Lena tried to sleep, she could hear the wind picking up, rattling the old window panes. She pulled the blanket tighter around her, but sleep eluded her. The house seemed alive, creaking and groaning as if it were breathing. Suddenly, there was a knock at the door. Lena's heart skipped a beat. She hadn't expected anyone to come by. It was nearly midnight, and Ashburn was a town that felt too quiet, too isolated for anyone to be out at this hour. Hesitantly, Lena made her way to the door and opened it, only to find that no one was there. The porch was empty, the street silent. She stood on the threshold for a moment, uncertain of what to do. That's when she noticed something strange, a single flower lying on the doorstep. It was an odd, pale purple flower, its petals tinged with an unnatural hue. Lena bent down to pick it up, but the moment her fingers brushed against it, she felt a chill run up her spine. The air grew colder, the hairs on the back of her neck standing on end. "Lena," Eli's voice called out from inside. She hesitated before stepping back into the house, closing the door behind her. "Everything okay?" Eli asked, his face full of concern as he looked up from the couch. I'm fine," Lena replied, still shaken, but deep down she knew that something wasn't right. As she placed the flower on the kitchen counter, she noticed something else. Beneath the petals was a small note, written in jagged, almost frantic handwriting. It simply read, "Don't trust the river." The days passed in an uneasy blur. The feeling of being watched never left Lena, especially when she ventured into the village. The locals, with their blank stares and distant expressions, seemed to avoid her at all costs. When she did manage to strike up a conversation, the responses were short, clipped, and uncomfortable, as if the townspeople were hiding something just beneath the surface. One morning, Lena woke to an unsettling silence. The usual sounds, the chirping of birds, the rustle of leaves in the wind, were gone. Instead, an unnatural stillness had settled over the village, as though the air itself was holding its breath. She glanced over at Eli's bed, but he wasn't there. "Eli?" she called, but her voice was swallowed by the silence. She checked the kitchen, the living room, and then the backyard, but he was nowhere to be found. Panic set in as she ran through the house calling his name, but there was no response. Her heart raced as she realized that Eli had disappeared. Lena ran outside, her breath coming in ragged gasps. She rushed to the river, hoping, praying that he hadn't wandered off in a daze or become lost in the woods. But when she reached the water's edge, she found only a haunting sight. Eli's footprints leading into the forest, but none coming back. The river was dark and churning, the current swift and angry. A thin mist rose from its surface, curling like smoke. Lena felt the weight of the air pressing down on her, as if something were waiting for her. She reached the spot where the river met the forest, her eyes scanning the trees for any sign of Eli. But the silence was suffocating, and the forest seemed to stretch on forever, a dark, endless maze. Then, just as Lena was about to give up, she heard it. Her brother's voice, faint but unmistakable. "Lena?" The sound came from deeper within the trees, but when Lena rushed forward, it was gone, swallowed by the forest. She stood frozen for a moment, her heart hammering in her chest. That's when she saw it, a shadow moving against the trees. It wasn't Eli, it was something else, something far darker. The figure watched her from the darkness, its eyes glowing faintly in the shadows. Lena's blood ran cold as she turned and ran back to the house, the echo of footsteps following her. As the door slammed behind her, Lena's mind raced. Something had taken Eli, and she knew, deep down, that she might never see him again. But whatever it wasn't done with her yet. Lena barely slept that night. Her mind raced, her thoughts tangled in a web of fear and confusion. Every creak of the house seemed like a whisper, a warning she couldn't quite understand. She thought of Eli, lost somewhere in the woods, or worse. The feeling of dread that had settled in her chest told her that whatever had taken him wasn't just some random accident. It was part of something much darker, something far older. The next morning, Lena did what she had to do. She walked down to the village center, hoping to find someone, anyone who could give her answers. The church bell rang out overhead, its sound heavy and mournful, as if it too were aware of the terror that had begun to unfold. Ashbourne was still eerily silent. The streets, as usual, were nearly empty, the few people she saw moving in strange, deliberate patterns. They didn't greet her. No one looked her in the eyes. The silence was suffocating, and Lena felt it more keenly today than ever. The first person she approached was an old man sitting on a bench near the post office, his hands folded neatly in his lap. His face was a mass of wrinkles, but his eyes, dark and penetrating, were sharp and aware. "Excuse me," Lena said, her voice shaking despite her efforts to remain calm. "I'm looking for my brother. His name is Eli. Have you seen him?" The old man's gaze didn't waver. For a long moment he said nothing, and then finally he spoke. "Eli?" His voice was low, almost a rasp. "I've seen many people pass through here, but the river, it takes what it wants. Best to let it be." Lena took a step closer, desperation rising in her chest. "What do you mean? My brother is gone. He was taken by the river, by something. I need help, please." The old man's eyes softened, and for the briefest moment a flicker of pity passed across his face. "You'll never get him back," he said quietly. "The river has him now. Once it claims someone, they're part of it. Forever. You're just a visitor in this place, but it's been here long before you, and it will be here long after." Lena's mind spun as she tried to process his words. "What are you talking about? What is this place? What is the river?" The old man's gaze darkened, and he looked away, as though searching for words that would not come. Then, with a final resigned sigh, he stood up slowly, his voice barely a whisper. "Ask the woman at the bakery. She'll tell you more." Without waiting for Lena to respond, he turned and walked away. leaving her standing there, feeling the weight of his cryptic words settle heavily in her mind. The river. What was he talking about? She had seen the river, the dark, angry water that now seemed like an ominous presence, pulling at her thoughts, taunting her with its secrets. Lena walked toward the bakery, the words of the old man ringing in her ears. The river has him now. Once it claims someone, they're part of it, forever. The bakery was small, nestled at the corner of the village's central square. It had a warm, welcoming aroma of freshly baked bread and pastries, but as Lena stepped inside, the air felt thick, as if the scent of the bread was merely masking something darker. Behind the counter stood a woman in her late 50s, her gray hair pulled back in a tight bun, and her eyes, a pale, unsettling shade of blue, watched Lena carefully as she entered. The woman's name was Marjorie, and the instant Lena met her gaze, she knew that Marjorie was no stranger to the strange happenings in Ashbourne. Lena hesitated for a moment before speaking, unsure how to approach the woman with her request. But Marjorie spoke first, as if reading her mind. "You're looking for your brother," she said, her voice calm, yet tinged with an undeniable sadness. "I can see it in your eyes, the fear, the desperation." Lena's breath caught in her throat. "How do you know?" "Because it happens every year," Marjorie replied, her tone flat, resigned. "One person always disappears. One person is taken, and the river, it claims what it is owed." Lena stepped closer, her pulse quickening. "What do you mean? What's happening to my brother? Why is he gone?" Marjorie looked down at the countertop, her hands trembling slightly as she wiped a piece of flour from the surface. "You're asking questions no one should ask," she said softly. "The people of Ashbourne, we are bound to the river, bound to the land. There's a ritual, a tradition that has been kept for centuries. It's a curse, you see, a curse that we can't escape." Lena's head spun. A ritual? A curse? This was madness. "What do you mean? A ritual for what?" "For the cult," Marjorie said, the words heavy with dread. "The people who came here long ago, fleeing from something worse. They escaped the cult that held their ancestors in thrall, but the cult followed them. And every year, they take one of us, one person. They bind their soul to the river, to the land. The river is their conduit, a bridge between life and death." Lena felt a chill creep up her spine as the weight of Marjorie's words settled in. "The cult?" she repeated, her voice barely a whisper. "But why didn't anyone tell me? Why is everyone acting like nothing is wrong?" "Because," Marjorie's eyes flickered with a shadow of regret, "we are all trapped. The cult's influence runs deep, and the people of Ashbourne have been complicit in the sacrifice for generations. We have no choice." Lena's mind reeled. She felt as if the walls of the bakery were closing in on her, suffocating her. "No choice? What do you mean? There has to be something we can do. I can't lose Eli." "You've already lost him," Marjorie said quietly. "The river has him, and every year the river grows stronger. The cult's power grows stronger. We are bound by blood, Lena. Your blood is tied to theirs." Lena's heart stopped. "What? What do you mean, my blood?" she asked, barely able to choke out the words. Marjorie didn't answer immediately. Instead, she stepped away from the counter, retrieving a small, worn, leather-bound book from beneath it. She placed it in Lena's hands. "The answers are here," Marjorie said. "The truth, but you won't like it." Lena opened the book slowly, her fingers trembling. The pages were yellowed with age, and the handwriting inside was crude, almost frantic. As she flipped through the pages, she found illustrations, strange symbols, drawings of people bound to the river, their eyes hollow and empty. There were notes in the margins, written in different hands, chronicling the disappearances, the sacrifices, and the curse that had plagued Ashbourne for centuries. And then she saw it, the name of her ancestor, one of the original villagers who had fled the cult. The book didn't just list the names of the people taken, it listed her family, her bloodline. The realization hit her like a punch to the stomach. Her family wasn't just connected to Ashbourne by coincidence. Her ancestors had been part of the original cult. They had fled, but their bloodline had never truly escaped. It had been passed down through the generations, each descendant marked for sacrifice. Lena dropped the book, her breath coming in short gasps. Number, this can't be true. Marjorie's voice was soft but unyielding. It's true, and now the cult is coming for you, Lena. Lena stumbled out of the bakery, her mind whirling with the horrifying truth. Everything about Ashbourne, every twisted, unsettling moment, suddenly made sense. She was connected to the cult, her bloodline cursed. Eli's disappearance, the strange occurrences, the whispers in the air, it was all part of the same sick cycle. The cult had taken him, just as it had taken countless others before him. She had to stop it. She had to find a way to break the cycle before it was too late. Lena knew the river held the key to everything. She had to confront it, face the darkness head on. She made her way to the water's edge once more, the afternoon light dimming, the air growing colder. As she approached the riverbank, she saw the figure again, the same shadow that had watched her from the trees. But this time, it wasn't a shadow. It was a person, or something that once had been. A woman, her face pale and twisted, her eyes hollow, reached out toward Lena. The air around her seemed to crackle with dark energy. "You can't escape," the woman whispered, her voice hollow and empty. "The river always takes what it is owed." Lena backed away, her mind racing. The woman's face flickered and distorted, and she felt the weight of the river pulling at her, dragging her toward it. The water churned, almost alive, as if the river itself were reaching out for her. But Lena wasn't ready to give up. She couldn't. With every ounce of strength she had, Lena turned and ran toward the forest, away from the river, away from the nightmare that had claimed her brother, and so many others before him. She could feel the river's pull, the cult's influence growing stronger. But there had to be a way to break it. There had to be a way to destroy the cult once and for all. The race against time had begun. Lena's heart thundered in her chest as she stumbled through the thick underbrush, the eerie sound of the river's whispering current beckoning her from behind. The woman, her face a ghastly mask of hollow eyes and contorted skin, had vanished into the trees as quickly as she had appeared. But the dread that filled Lena's veins remained. The air around her was thick with the sense that something was coming, closing in from all sides, suffocating her in an invisible grip. She was no longer sure what was real and what wasn't. Her mind, strained by sleepless nights and the horrors she'd uncovered, felt like it was unraveling with every step she took. The town of Ashbourne was more than just a place. It was a living, breathing entity, a malignant force with deep-rooted ties to the past. And she, Lena, was a part of that past, whether she liked it or not. Her thoughts spun in a dizzying whirlwind. Her bloodline was cursed. The realization had shattered her sense of self. She was no innocent bystander. She was as much a part of the ritual as Eli had been. Her family had run, but they had never fully escaped. The cult, the river, they were waiting for her, pulling her back. And now, the cult was coming. Lena's feet carried her toward the only place she knew to go, the church. The old bell tower loomed over the village, and she had seen it every day, towering above the rest of the buildings like a silent sentinel. It had been there long before she arrived, and it felt like it had always been watching, waiting for her to return. It was a gamble, but it was the only option she had left. The church was colder than the rest of the village, its Gothic spires casting long twisted shadows over the stone path that led to the heavy oak doors. As Lena pushed them open, a wave of stale air hit her, ancient, musty, and imbued with the scent of old incense. The inside of the church was dim, lit only by the faint glow of candles flickering on the altar. The walls were covered with faded murals and stained glass windows depicting scenes she couldn't quite understand. Visions of fire, water, and twisted figures that seemed to watch her from every angle. The pews were empty, and the stillness in the air was suffocating. But there was something more in this place, a presence that made Lena's skin crawl. It was as if the church was alive, its heart beating with a dark rhythm that pulsed beneath the floorboards. In the center of the room stood an altar, draped in black cloths, with strange symbols carved into its surface. It was old, older than anything in Ashbourne, and there was a strange, pulsing energy about it, as if it had seen countless sacrifices. She stepped forward, hesitant but determined. The whisper of her footsteps echoed in the emptiness, and she could feel her breath catch in her throat. This place, this church, it was more than just a structure of stone. It was a nexus of power. The cult had used it for centuries to commune with whatever dark forces they worshipped. As Lena moved closer to the altar, her foot kicked something small, a worn piece of parchment. She bent down to pick it up, unfolding it carefully. Her eyes scanned the symbols scrawled across the paper, twisted sigils that she had seen before in Marjorie's book. There was a ritual here, a final step that was required to bind a soul completely to the river. It was a binding of blood and spirit, a sacrifice to ensure that the entity behind the river's power would remain strong. The names on the list, her ancestors, had all been marked for this ritual, but Lena could see one name among them that made her stomach drop. Lena Blackwood. Her name. The realization hit her like a jolt of electricity. The cult had been preparing for this moment for generations. Her bloodline had been a part of the ritual all along, and now it was her turn. But Lena wasn't just a victim of the past. She was a force that could break the cycle. She had the power to stop this madness. She had to stop it. Suddenly, the heavy doors of the church slammed shut behind her, the sound reverberating through the stone walls like the roar of thunder. Lena spun around, panic rising in her chest. The air grew thick, heavy with a sinister energy. Shadows moved along the walls, twisting into shapes that weren't quite human. The flickering candlelight seemed to grow dimmer, as if the very light in the church was being consumed by the dark presence that had awakened. The voices came next, low, murmuring whispers in a language Lena couldn't understand. They echoed in her mind, growing louder and louder until they threatened to overwhelm her. Lena backed away from the altar, her heart racing. The shadows converged, coalescing into dark, writhing figures, each one more monstrous than the last. Their eyes glowed with a sickly light, and their faces were contorted in permanent screams of agony. They were the souls trapped by the river, bound by the ritual, forever tortured by the force that had taken them. Lena. The whisper of her name was unmistakable. Her breath caught in her throat as she spun around to find the source. The woman from the river stood at the edge of the church, her hollow eyes locked onto Lena's with an expression of pure malice. "You can't escape us," the woman crooned, her voice like nails scraping across stone. "You're already ours." Lena's body tensed as she realized what was happening. The woman wasn't just a spirit, she was a manifestation of the cult's power, one of the many lost souls bound to the river's curse. But Lena refused to succumb. She could feel the power of the church, the darkness that pulsed in its very foundation, but she also felt something else, something deep within herself. Her bloodline, her family's escape had always been temporary, but now Lena had the chance to end the cycle for good. She turned her back on the woman facing the altar and closed her eyes. She focused on the symbols in the ancient book, the rituals, the ancient power of the river, and the choice that was before her. She wasn't just going to fight the cult. She was going to destroy it. Lena's voice rose in a chant, her words full of defiance. The ancient language, long dormant in her blood, emerged from her lips, and as she spoke, the air around her began to crackle with power. The shadows writhed and screamed, their faces contorting in agony as the binding forces of the ritual began to unravel. The river's hold on Ashbourne was weakening, but as Lena reached the final words of the chant, the air in the church grew cold. A powerful force slammed into her chest, throwing her back against the altar. The woman's form grew larger, more monstrous, her eyes burning with fury. "You cannot defeat me," the woman screamed, her voice warping and distorting with rage. Lena gasped for air as she scrambled to her feet, knowing that this final moment would decide everything. With every ounce of her will, she grasped the pendant around her neck, a relic passed down through her bloodline, and thrust it into the altar. There was a blinding flash of light, and then silence. When Lena opened her eyes, the church was empty. The shadows had vanished, leaving behind only the remnants of the altar and the sense that something ancient and dark had been banished. The air was still thick with the remnants of power, but the oppressive weight that had consumed the town for generations had lifted. But there was no time to rest. As Lena walked out of the church, she saw the river in the distance, its dark waters flowing freely, no longer tainted by the cult's power. Yet, in the back of her mind, she knew that the battle wasn't over. Eli, he was still out there, lost in the woods, somewhere between life and death. The curse had been broken, but the cost was high. The spirits that had been bound to the river, trapped for centuries, were now free. But Lena knew there was one final choice she had to make. Would she follow Eli into the depths, facing the darkness of the river to bring him back? Or would she return to the world she had once known, forever marked by the horrors of Ashbourne? As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the village, Lena made her decision. The story of Ashbourne was over, but her story, her fight against the darkness, was just beginning. Lena stood on the banks of the river, her body numb from the confrontation in the church. The oppressive weight that had hung over Ashbourne for so long had lifted, but she could still feel the lingering echoes of the curse in the air. The shadows were gone, the dark figures that had once haunted the village and its people vanishing into nothingness. But in their place, an eerie stillness remained, as if the land itself was holding its breath. The river flowed before her, dark and restless, its waters swirling in a way that felt almost sentient. The pull it exerted on her was undeniable, as if it was calling her to cross, to follow its current and confront the horrors that lay beneath its surface. Eli, she hadn't heard from him since the night he disappeared, and the truth weighed heavily on her heart. Her brother was lost, somewhere between life and death, caught in the cycle of the cult's curse. The ritual had claimed him, his soul, now bound to the river, but Lena had broken the cycle. She had destroyed the cult's hold over Ashbourne, but had she freed Eli too? Her breath caught in her throat as she thought of him. Was he waiting for her on the other side? Or was he lost forever, trapped in the same darkness that had consumed Ashbourne for centuries? She closed her eyes, feeling the pull of the river in her bones. The town, the people, everything she had known, felt distant now, as if they were a part of a life she could no longer return to. Ashbourne had always been cursed, but now it was different. It was a town freed from the cult's grip, a place no longer shackled by its malevolent power. But what of her brother? Lena felt a shiver crawl up her spine as the weight of her decision loomed over her. She had broken the curse, but she hadn't stopped the cycle completely. The river still existed, still held the power to claim those it desired, and Eli was still out there, lost to the river's darkness. She couldn't leave him behind. Without a word, Lena stepped into the water. The river's cold grasp pulled at her immediately, dragging her deeper into its depths. It was like nothing she had ever experienced, far more than just a physical force. It was as though the water had become a part of her, each drop sinking into her skin, filling her with a suffocating dread. But she couldn't turn back now. She had come too far. The current was strong, almost unyielding, as if the river itself was trying to hold her back. But Lena pushed forward, determined to find Eli, determined to free him from the grip of the cult. The water surged around her legs, up to her waist, then to her chest. It seemed to whisper her name, pulling at her mind, urging her to let go. But she wouldn't. Through the murky water, she saw shapes moving beneath the surface, twisted, ghostly figures that reached up with pale clawed hands, their eyes wide with fear and longing. The souls trapped in the river. They were like echoes lingering in the dark depths, bound to the water, forever haunted by the horrors of the past. Lena could feel their despair radiating from them, the weight of centuries of torment crushing her heart. And then there was a voice, faint, distant, but unmistakable. Lena. Her heart stopped. It was Eli. His voice was barely a whisper, but it was enough. The connection between them, the bond that had been forged through years of love, of shared memories, was still there, still strong. Eli? Lena's voice trembled as she called out, her words lost in the current. Lena, help me. The voice was faint, but she could hear the desperation in it, the fear. I can't hold on much longer. Lena's chest tightened as she reached out, her hands grasping at the water, desperate to find him. She couldn't see him, couldn't touch him, but she could feel him, just beyond her grasp, pulled deeper into the river's darkness. The water grew colder, the shadows deeper, as if the river itself was trying to swallow her whole. Lena stumbled forward, her legs growing weaker, her body fighting against the relentless pull of the current. The river didn't want her to find Eli. It didn't want her to free him. But she couldn't stop. She couldn't let him go. With every ounce of strength she had left, Lena pushed forward. The whispers grew louder, the voices of the lost souls filling her mind, drowning out everything else. Eli, the thought burned in her mind. She had to find him. She had to save him. And then, through the swirling darkness, she saw him. Eli was standing in the water, his face pale and drawn, his eyes hollow, as if he had been trapped in the river for years. His clothes were soaked, clinging to his body as he reached out toward her, his lips moving but no sound coming from them. The air around him shimmered with a cold, unnatural light, and the river's current pulled at him, threatening to drag him under once more. "Eli!" Lena cried, reaching out with trembling hands, but he didn't move. His face remained expressionless, as though he didn't even see her. The river had him. Lena's heart broke as she watched him struggle, his body jerking with the violent pull of the current. He was still there, still alive, but he was slipping away, sinking into the depths. "Lena," he whispered again, his voice barely audible, as though it came from a great distance. In that moment, Lena realized the truth. Eli wasn't just lost in the river. He was the final sacrifice. He was bound to it, just as the others had been. The cult had taken him, but it wasn't just a ritual that held him here. It was his blood, his lineage. He was part of the curse. He always had been. The river would never let him go, but Lena wasn't going to let the river claim him, not after everything she had fought for. She had broken the cycle, had destroyed the cult's influence, but she had one last thing to do: to sever Eli's connection to the river, to free him from the cycle of torment that had plagued their bloodline for centuries. Taking a deep breath, Lena plunged into the cold water, pushing her body against the current. She reached for Eli, her fingers grazing his, the touch sending a shock of cold through her body. She whispered the words, her bloodline's ancient language, the same language that had bound her family to the river's curse. This time, she wasn't asking for mercy. She was demanding it. The water surged violently around them, as if the river was fighting back, but Lena didn't relent. She pressed on, her voice rising, her words growing stronger, more commanding. The river's hold on her brother was weakening. Finally, with one last desperate cry, she reached out and grasped Eli's arm, pulling him toward her. His eyes locked onto hers, and for the first time since his disappearance, she saw recognition in them, a flicker of the brother she had known. "Eli," she whispered, her voice trembling with tears. "You're free." The river let out a low guttural roar, as if protesting, but Lena held firm. And in that moment, the river released its grip. Eli collapsed into her arms, his body trembling, his breathing shallow but steady. The pull of the river was gone. Lena had broken the curse. The river fell silent. When Lena and Eli emerged from the water, the sun was rising, casting a pale golden light over the village. The once ominous waters of the river had returned to their natural state. No longer a conduit for the cult's power, no longer a prison for the lost souls. The curse was broken, the cycle had ended, but the cost had been great. As Lena looked around, she realized that Ashbourne would never be the same. The people who had been trapped in the cult's grip, their souls had been freed, but at the cost of centuries of their lives. The village itself had borne the weight of the dark secret for too long. It would take time for the people to heal, for the land to reclaim its peace. Lena looked down at Eli, her younger brother, now safe in her arms. The bond between them had been severed from the river's grasp, but their lives would never be the same. "I thought I lost you forever," Lena whispered, tears welling in her eyes. Eli, though weakened, managed a small smile. "You saved me. You broke it." Lena nodded, her heart still racing, but now full of a quiet strength. They had survived. They had faced the darkness and overcome it. But she knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. There would be scars, memories of the horrors they had faced, and the river would always be there as a reminder of what had been, what they had fought to break. But for now, the cycle had ended, and that was enough. The invitation arrived unexpectedly one Tuesday afternoon, folded neatly in a manila envelope with no return address. Inside, Sarah found a crisp letter written in elegant, looping handwriting. "Dear Sarah and Daniel, we invite you to experience the tranquility of our secluded lighthouse in Maine. Nestled on the edge of the world, it offers peace, serenity, and unparalleled beauty. This is a rare opportunity to escape the noise and find rest. We look forward to hosting you." It seemed like an answer to her prayers. Sarah had always wanted a quiet vacation, a place far away from their fast-paced city lives. Daniel, her fiancé, was skeptical at first. He preferred bustling cities over quiet retreats, but after a few minutes of persuasion, he agreed. The thought of being away from his hectic job for a week had its appeal. They packed their bags, leaving behind the noise of their daily lives and driving through winding roads that led them further away from civilization. The further they drove, the more Sarah felt the air grow thicker, more oppressive. She pushed the unease aside, attributing it to the unfamiliarity of the place. As they neared the lighthouse, the wind picked up, tugging at their clothes. The sky, which had been clear moments before, was now blanketed in ominous clouds. The lighthouse towered above them, an ancient stone structure built against the cliffs. It looked as though it had stood for centuries, its weathered stone gray and cracked from the elements. "I didn't realize it would be this isolated," Sarah said, her voice trembling slightly as she looked at the towering structure. Daniel, ever the optimist, tried to reassure her. "That's the point, right? This is the kind of place we came for. A real escape." But as they unloaded their luggage and approached the door, Sarah felt an odd sense of foreboding. The air felt colder than it should have been, and a strange, pungent smell lingered around the door. The sensation was fleeting, like an itch she couldn't quite scratch. Still, she shook it off, smiling as she followed Daniel inside. Inside, the lighthouse was dark, the air heavy with dust. The floor creaked under their footsteps as they made their way through the entrance hall. The furniture was sparse, the walls adorned with faded tapestries and ancient maps of the coastline. But it wasn't the decor that caught Sarah's attention. It was the strange, unsettling silence that seemed to hang in the air like a shroud. "Feels like no one's been here for a while," Daniel muttered, glancing around the room. Sarah nodded, but something about the place felt wrong. She couldn't put her finger on it, but the silence felt too thick, like the place was holding its breath. They continued to explore. Upstairs, the main living area was small but comfortable. There were no modern amenities, no television, no internet, no distractions. The only sounds were the faint hum of the wind outside and the occasional creak of the house as it settled. The windows overlooked the jagged cliffs and the churning sea, a beautiful but harsh landscape. In one corner of the room, Sarah noticed something odd. It was an ancient wooden chest, covered in dust and cobwebs. As she approached it, she felt a chill run down her spine. "Probably just some old keepsakes," Daniel said, not noticing her unease. Sarah shook her head. "Something feels off about this place." But before she could investigate further, Daniel was already exploring the adjoining rooms, eager to unpack and settle in. They had planned on spending a week here, and despite her unease, Sarah wanted to make the most of it. That evening, as the sun set behind the cliffs, Sarah and Daniel sat down to dinner at a small table in the kitchen. The candlelight flickered softly, casting long shadows against the walls. The dinner was quiet, with only the occasional exchange of small talk. But as the wind howled outside, a strange sensation crept over Sarah. It was as if the house was alive, watching them. As the night wore on, Sarah became more and more restless. She tried to ignore the feeling, but the air was thick, oppressive. The wind outside seemed to grow louder, the howling sounds echoing through the house like whispers. She told herself it was just her imagination. Still, she found it difficult to fall asleep that night. The bed felt too hard, the blankets too thin, and the wind kept her awake, its howls scraping against the windows like the scratching of claws. But what really unsettled her were the voices. At first, she thought she was dreaming. She could have sworn she heard whispers, low and unintelligible, coming from somewhere in the dark. They seemed to move, growing louder and softer, as if the house itself was alive. She turned to Daniel, but he was asleep, his breathing steady and undisturbed. "Daniel?" she whispered, but her voice came out hoarse and weak. She was suddenly too afraid to call out. The whispers didn't stop. They came closer, echoing in her ears. And then she thought she saw something. Movement at the edge of her vision, shadows shifting in the dark, but when she blinked, they were gone. The next morning, Sarah's mind was spinning. She couldn't remember if the voices had been real or just a figment of her imagination, but they lingered in her thoughts, a constant reminder of the unease that had settled in her chest. Daniel, on the other hand, seemed completely unbothered. "Maybe you're just tired," he said, as he tried to convince her to go for a walk and enjoy the natural beauty of the coast. "It's nothing. A little fresh air will help." But Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that something was deeply wrong with the lighthouse. As they explored the house during the day, she found more strange details. Symbols carved into the walls, deep scratches in the wooden beams. The symbols looked ancient, like something from a forgotten language. "Look at this," she said, showing Daniel the markings. "What do you think they mean?" Daniel examined the carvings, his brow furrowed. "Probably just some old graffiti or something. Nothing to worry about." But Sarah couldn't let it go. She felt a pull to these symbols, as though they were calling her. She traced her fingers along the rough edges of the carvings, a shiver running down her spine. Something about them seemed to hum with an eerie energy. Later that afternoon, Sarah ventured into the keeper's quarters, hoping to find more clues. The room was sparsely furnished, a simple bed and desk, but there was a chest at the foot of the bed. Hesitantly, she opened it, her heart pounding in her chest. Inside, she found old journals and papers, records of past keepers. The journals were worn, the ink faded, but they told a story that chilled her to the bone. The journals spoke of the lighthouse's dark history. It wasn't just a beacon for ships, it was a prison built to contain a demon, an entity named Kephos, who fed on the souls of those who ventured too close to the lighthouse. The journals detailed generations of keepers, people who had been bound to the lighthouse to ensure the demon remained imprisoned, their lives sacrifices to contain Kephos's power. Each entry spoke of the rising terror in the house as the demon's influence grew stronger. The keepers wrote about strange happenings, whispers in the dark, and the gradual loss of sanity as they were slowly consumed by the evil force locked within the lighthouse. Sarah's hands shook as she read the final entry, written in a frantic scrawl. The demon awakens. The bloodline must be renewed. One must become the keeper to ensure its imprisonment. Only the blood of a keeper can hold the beast within. The journals in Sarah's hands were now more than just a curiosity. They were a warning. The words on the page were chilling, filled with terror and desperation, written by people who had known exactly what they were dealing with. Every sentence was soaked in fear, as though each keeper who had lived here felt the weight of a terrible knowledge bearing down on them, crushing their spirit, slowly driving them mad. Sarah sat in the dimly lit room, the pages scattered around her. Her fingers trembled as she flipped through the journals, reading snippets of entries from different generations of keepers, each more frantic than the last. They spoke of rituals, blood oaths, and sacrifices, all in the name of keeping the demon Kephos contained. But the one phrase that echoed through her mind more than any other was, "The demon feeds on souls. The keeper must never falter, or all will be lost." She stood up and went to the small window, staring out at the dark, churning sea. The wind had picked up, and the waves slammed against the jagged rocks below like an angry beast. The lighthouse towered over her, a sentinel of stone and wood, its crumbling walls holding something far darker than she could have imagined. "Daniel," she whispered under her breath, "we're not safe here." At that moment, Daniel entered the room, carrying a cup of tea. He paused when he saw the look on her face, the fear that had crept into her eyes. "What is it, Sarah? You look like you've seen a ghost," he said, setting the cup down on the table. She hesitated, her heart pounding. She wanted to tell him everything, but how could she? Could she even explain the creeping dread that gnawed at her insides, the sense that they were being watched, that something was listening to their every word? How could she put into words the growing certainty that they were no longer just guests in a remote lighthouse, but prisoners in a cursed fortress? "The journals," Sarah began, her voice shaking. They're not just about the history of the lighthouse. They're about the people who were trapped here, the keepers. The last few generations, Daniel. They weren't just caretakers of the light. They were bound to this place. They had to keep the demon locked away. Daniel raised an eyebrow, clearly skeptical. A demon? Come on, Sarah. Don't tell me you're buying into this. This is just some creepy story someone wrote to make the place seem mysterious. There's nothing here but old, dusty books and a lot of solitude. But Sarah wasn't so sure anymore. The whispers from last night were still fresh in her mind. The feeling of being watched had only grown stronger, and now, with the journals in hand, she felt a growing sense of urgency. There was something beneath the surface, something waiting to be discovered. The symbol, she continued, her voice low. The carvings on the walls, they aren't just decorations, they're warnings. Warnings to keep people out, to keep the demon from breaking free. Daniel didn't answer. He simply walked over to her and placed a hand on her shoulder. You're not making sense. I know this place feels weird, but we're safe here. We just need to relax. Let's go out and take a walk along the cliffs. That'll clear your head. But Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that time was running out. She looked out the window again toward the sea, which had darkened under the weight of ominous clouds. Something was stirring in the deep, something ancient, something evil, and it was coming. That night, as Sarah lay in bed, the air grew thick with tension. The wind howled louder than it had the previous night, rattling the windows with an eerie force. She tried to sleep, but every creak of the floorboards, every whisper in the walls kept her on edge. Something was wrong. She could feel it deep in her bones. Just as her eyes began to droop, she heard it again, the whispering. It was faint at first, but it grew louder, more insistent. The words were barely audible, but they carried a chilling guttural tone that made her blood run cold. She sat up in bed, her heart racing. "Daniel," she whispered, but he didn't stir. He was deep in sleep, his breathing steady, unbothered by the sounds that filled the room. The whispers grew louder, louder still, until they were a cacophony of voices, like 1,000 spirits speaking all at once, filling the air around her. They seemed to call her name, urging her to come closer, to listen to the secrets they had to share. Sarah. The voice was clear now, distinct. It was coming from behind her, from the corner of the room. She turned slowly, heart pounding in her chest. In the shadows, something shifted. A figure moved in the dark, something tall and imposing, its eyes glowing faintly in the gloom. It was humanoid, but its features were distorted, as though made of smoke and shadow. Its shape twisted, fluctuating like it was struggling to hold a solid form. The whispers turned into a low growl. "Sarah." It hissed again, a voice filled with hunger. "Come, closer." Frozen in place, her mind screamed at her to run, but her body refused to obey. She was rooted to the spot, her legs numb, her mouth dry. The air around her thickened, growing colder with each passing second. The figure stepped closer, its form becoming more defined, revealing a grotesque face with hollow eyes that seemed to swallow the light. The whispers became louder, the words clearer. "You are the key. You are the one. You must come to me." With a sudden burst of strength, Sarah screamed, breaking free from the paralysis that had held her in place. She scrambled out of bed, knocking over a chair as she ran for the door. Behind her, she could hear the creature's footsteps, slow but deliberate, as it followed her. She slammed the door shut behind her, her breath coming in ragged gasps. The creature's whispers faded, but the terror that gripped her chest remained. She rushed to Daniel's side, shaking him awake. "Daniel, wake up!" she cried, her voice trembling with fear. "We have to leave. We have to get out of here." Daniel, still groggy from sleep, blinked up at her. "What's going on, Sarah? What's happening?" She tried to explain, but her words came out in frantic gasps, the horror of what she had seen overwhelming her. "Please," she begged, grabbing his arm. "You have to believe me. We're not alone. There's something here, something evil, and we're in danger." But Daniel just stared at her, his face blank, as if he couldn't comprehend what she was saying. Suddenly there was a loud bang from downstairs, a thud that echoed through the house, sending a jolt of fear through Sarah's veins. It was followed by the sound of scraping, like claws dragging across wood. "Do you hear that?" Sarah asked, her voice barely a whisper. Daniel turned, his face pale. I don't hear anything," but Sarah heard it clearly. The dragging, the scraping, getting closer. The next morning, the lighthouse was still. The wind had stopped, and the air was unnervingly still. Sarah barely slept, but when dawn finally broke, she felt the faintest hint of dread ease off her shoulders. Maybe it had just been a nightmare, a product of her overactive imagination and the isolation of the lighthouse. But then she saw it, the mark on her arm. It was faint at first, just a scar-like line, but it had appeared overnight, running from her wrist to the elbow. The mark was jagged, as though something had clawed at her skin. It wasn't just any scratch, though. It looked like the symbol she had seen on the walls of the lighthouse. "Daniel, look at this," she whispered, her voice barely above a breath. He stepped closer, his eyes widening as he took in the strange mark. "How did that get there?" "I don't know," Sarah answered, "but I think it's a sign that we're marked." Her heart raced. Whatever had been watching her was no longer content to remain in the shadows. The sun had barely risen when Sarah noticed the mark on her arm, the strange jagged line that hadn't been there the night before. It was a cruel reminder of how quickly the darkness had begun to consume their reality, seeping into every crevice of the lighthouse. "Daniel," she said, her voice trembling, "this isn't just a cut. This is a mark, a symbol." Daniel stood frozen at the edge of the room, his face pale, his eyes wide with disbelief. His gaze shifted from her arm to the door, then back again, as if waiting for the world to make sense. The stillness of the house felt suffocating, as if it were waiting for something to happen. "Maybe it's from when you tripped last night, or when we were exploring the house," Daniel muttered, as though trying to rationalize the unexplainable. But Sarah knew better. She'd felt it. Something had marked her. Something dark, something ancient. She didn't answer. Her mind was racing. Memories of the journals, of the whispers, of the shadows in the night. Everything seemed to connect in a horrifying way that her mind could no longer deny. There was something else in this place, something alive. "We have to leave," Sarah insisted, her voice steady despite the panic rising in her chest. "We have to get out of here, Daniel. The lighthouse is cursed, and we're not safe. Don't you feel it? This place isn't what it seems." Daniel's skepticism lingered, but his expression had shifted. He could see the fear in her eyes, hear it in the tremble of her voice, and as he looked around the room, he felt it too, a chill that seemed to crawl under his skin. But before he could respond, The loud bang from downstairs echoed again, the unmistakable sound of something heavy striking the wooden floor, followed by the faintest scraping, as if something or someone was dragging itself across the house. They both froze. "Stay close," Sarah whispered, grabbing Daniel's hand tightly. They crept toward the stairs, every creak of the old wooden floor beneath their feet, amplified in the silence. The house felt alive now, more oppressive than ever, as if it were a beast waiting to devour them. As they reached the bottom of the stairs, Sarah motioned for Daniel to stop. She strained to listen, heart hammering in her chest. The house was deathly quiet, but then the low murmur of voices, those same haunting whispers, began to fill the air. They seemed to be coming from everywhere, swirling around them, too many voices overlapping, indecipherable. "Can you hear that?" Sarah asked, her voice barely audible. I don't hear anything," Daniel said, but his face was pale, and his hand gripped hers with growing tension. Then, from the darkness of the hallway ahead, a shape emerged. It was a shadow, but not like any shadow Sarah had seen before. It was moving toward them with unnatural speed, its form twisting and shifting as if it was struggling to remain in one piece. It was humanoid, but its limbs were elongated and misshapen, its head too large for its body, its eyes glowing faintly in the darkness. Sarah gasped, stumbling backward. Daniel saw it then, really saw it, and his face drained of color. "What the hell is that?" The creature didn't speak, but its presence was a suffocating weight that filled the air, making it impossible to breathe. It moved closer, its twisted form dragging itself toward them with unsettling speed, and the whispers grew louder, more frantic, urging them to move, to escape. But escape wasn't an option. The creature stopped just inches from them. It looked down at Sarah, and its hollow, glowing eyes seemed to pierce her very soul. She couldn't move, couldn't breathe, as if her very existence was frozen in time. And then, with a voice that was a low rasp, like 1,000 voices speaking through cracked, dry lips, it whispered, "You are marked. You belong to him now. You cannot leave." Sarah's heart raced, her chest tightening as though she was being crushed under the weight of something enormous. She looked at Daniel, but he was paralyzed, rooted to the spot, unable to move or speak. You're not real," Daniel finally managed to choke out. "You can't be." But the creature only tilted its head, its smile grotesque and unnerving. Its long, twisted fingers reached out to Sarah, grazing the mark on her arm. As it touched her skin, the mark seemed to pulse, growing darker, deeper, as if it were alive. "The Keeper's curse," the creature hissed. "You are now bound to the lighthouse. The bloodline must be renewed." The word Keeper echoed in Sarah's mind, and suddenly the pieces clicked into place. The journals, the demons, the sacrifices. The Keepers weren't just caretakers. They were vessels. They were the guardians of the demon, bound by blood to hold it prisoner. Sarah's mind reeled with this new understanding, and she forced herself to move, breaking free of the creature's hold. "We can't just stand here," she gasped to Daniel. "We need to run." But the creature wasn't finished. It laughed, low and guttural, and then before Sarah could move, the air grew unbearably cold, freezing the very breath in her lungs. The ground beneath her feet seemed to shift, as if the house itself was alive and shifting, bending to some terrible will. The house was no longer the safe haven it had once appeared to be. The walls pulsed with malevolent energy, and the shadows moved like living things, flickering at the corners of her vision. The demon was alive, and it was more than just a myth. It was a living, breathing nightmare, and it was not content to remain imprisoned. Sarah and Daniel stumbled through the hallways, but the house itself seemed to shift around them. The doors they had passed through earlier now seemed to be blocked by unseen forces, the paths twisting and turning in impossible ways. The lighthouse was no longer a structure. It was a maze, a labyrinth designed to trap them. "Where do we go?" Daniel gasped, looking around in desperation. "There's no way out." Sarah tried to control her panic, pushing forward, determined to find a way to escape, but the whispers surrounded them, growing louder, as though the very air was alive with the demon's presence. The symbols on the walls seemed to pulse, shifting and changing, warping into strange shapes as if mocking their every move. Then they reached the staircase leading up to the tower, the heart of the lighthouse. The light at the top flickered dimly, a warning that whatever lay above was worse than anything they had encountered so far. "Daniel, we have to go up there," Sarah said, her voice barely a whisper. "Are you insane?" Daniel shouted, his eyes wild with fear. "That's where it's coming from. The demon's up there. We can't—" "We have no choice," she cut him off. "If we don't confront it, we'll never get out of here. I think the only way to stop this is to break the curse." Without waiting for him to respond, Sarah started up the stairs, her footsteps echoing in the stillness. Behind her, Daniel hesitated, but fear of being alone in the dark drove him to follow. The tower was even darker than the rest of the lighthouse. The air grew colder with each step, the silence pressing in around them like a vice. As they reached the top, they were met with the flickering of the lighthouse's light, its beam cutting through the darkness, but there was no warmth to it, only cold. And then, at the center of the room, a figure stood in the center of the light. It was Kephos. The demon, in its full, terrifying form, towered above them. It was like nothing Sarah had ever imagined. Its body was made of shadows and smoke, constantly shifting and changing. Its eyes glowed with an unnatural fire, burning with an ancient hunger. "You have come to face me," the demon spoke, its voice like the grinding of stone. "But your fate is sealed. You are mine now, and your soul will feed me." Sarah's heart raced, but she stood her ground. "Not if I can stop it." The creature laughed, the sound reverberating in the room. "You think you can break the curse. You are nothing but a tool, an offering." With a fierce, defiant cry, Sarah lunged forward, determined to break free from the demon's grip. And in that moment, she realized the truth. One of them had to become the new keeper. One of them had to sacrifice themselves to bind the demon once again. The demon, Kephos, loomed before Sarah and Daniel like a force of nature, its presence suffocating the room. Its body was an ever-changing mass of darkness and smoke, flickering in and out of form. Its glowing eyes seared through them, igniting their fears. The air felt like it was being drawn out of the room, as if the lighthouse itself were breathing in sync with the demon, waiting for the moment when it would be released. Sarah's heart pounded, her thoughts racing. They had come so far, but now the reality of what they had to do crushed down on her. The creature's laughter echoed through her mind, mocking her every attempt to fight back. "You cannot fight what is inevitable," Kephos hissed, its voice rattling the walls. "The Keeper's bloodline is cursed. You are mine." Sarah clenched her fists, standing her ground despite the fear that threatened to consume her. She was terrified, yes, but there was something stronger in her. The desire to protect Daniel, to save them both from the hell that was closing in. "You're wrong," Sarah said, her voice shaking but resolute. "We can stop this." The demon tilted its head, as if amused by her defiance. "You think you can defeat me? You are nothing, but I offer you a choice. One of you must take my place. One of you must become the new keeper, and when you do, you will become my eternal guardian, bound to this cursed lighthouse, forever, a prisoner to me." Daniel's eyes darted between Sarah and the demon. His hands trembled at his sides, the weight of the decision pressing down on him. "Sarah, no," he whispered, his voice pleading. "Don't listen to it. We can fight this. We'll find another way. We don't have to become part of its trap." But Sarah knew the truth. She had seen the symbol on her arm, had felt the power of the demon growing stronger with each passing moment. They were already part of the curse. There was no other way out. She turned to Daniel, her eyes filled with tears, but her voice steady. "One of us has to stay. One of us has to become the keeper so the demon can never escape." Daniel's face twisted with agony. "Remember, I won't let you sacrifice yourself. I love you." The demon laughed, its form shifting with pleasure as it watched them struggle. "It doesn't matter who sacrifices themselves. You will both suffer in the end. You will both belong to me. The Keeper's curse cannot be undone." Sarah felt the weight of the demon's words bearing down on her. She could feel the life in her body slowly slipping away, the mark on her arm pulsing in rhythm with her heartbeat. There was no escaping it. They couldn't outrun the curse, but there was one thing she could do. "Daniel," she whispered, stepping closer to him. "It has to be me. I've already been marked. I'll be the one to stay. I'll bind Kephos again." Daniel's face contorted with panic, and his voice cracked with raw emotion. "Sarah, no. I won't let you do this. I don't care what it takes. We'll find another way. Please don't leave me." Tears streamed down Sarah's face as she touched his cheek, her heart breaking at the thought of leaving him behind, but she knew what she had to do. The demon had already made its claim on her, and there was no turning back. If she didn't do this, Kephos would escape, and countless others would fall victim to its hunger. "I love you," Sarah said softly. "I always will." She turned back to the demon, her voice rising as she faced it one last time. "I accept the curse. I will become the new keeper." The demon's eyes burned brighter, its form beginning to solidify as it drew closer to Sarah. "You are wise, mortal," it purred. "You understand what you must do. Your sacrifice will feed me, and your soul will be bound to this lighthouse for eternity." Sarah felt her body grow heavy as the darkness enveloped her. The demon's power surged through her, cold and oppressive. Her skin felt like it was being pulled from her bones, and her soul seemed to slip away, tethered to the cursed fate of the lighthouse. But just before the demon could claim her fully, a searing light erupted from within her. The lighthouse's lantern above flickered violently, casting a brilliant beam of light across the room, pushing back the shadows that had suffocated them. The light of the lighthouse, the very symbol of the keeper's duty, began to react with Sarah's sacrifice, locking her into the role of the new guardian. The demon howled in fury, its form writhing as the power of the lighthouse fought against it. The darkness began to recede, pushing Kephas back into the depths where it had once been imprisoned. But Sarah felt the tug of the demon's power, the weight of the curse pulling her deeper into the shadows. She collapsed to her knees, her body shaking with the effort to maintain control. "Daniel, I'm sorry," she gasped. "I'm so sorry." The demon's power surged one last time, but this time it was not enough. The light from the lighthouse broke through the darkness, and with a final deafening scream, Kephos was dragged back into the depths, its form shattering into 1,000 pieces. And then there was silence. When Sarah opened her eyes, she was no longer in the lighthouse tower. Instead, she found herself standing in a vast empty space, an endless void of shifting shadows and swirling mist. The air was thick with the weight of 1,000 souls, each one trapped in eternal darkness. Sarah's breath caught in her throat as she realized where she was. She wasn't free. She wasn't released from the curse. She had become the new keeper, the eternal guardian of the lighthouse, bound to it for as long as it stood. The lighthouse loomed behind her, its light now a steady beam that cut through the void. She could feel its pulse, its call, her call. It was now her duty to maintain the seal, to keep Kephos imprisoned for eternity. But there was no escaping it. She was part of the lighthouse now. She was the lighthouse. "Sarah," a voice whispered from the shadows. She turned but saw no one, yet she knew who it was. Daniel. He had been the one to remain behind, the one who had stayed behind to make sure the curse was broken. But now he was gone, lost in the darkness. He would never be free. Sarah's heart ached as she whispered his name. "Daniel, I'm sorry, I love you." But there was no answer, and so the lighthouse stood in silence, its dark secret hidden from the world. The demon Kephos remained bound, but its hunger never ceased. And though the lighthouse's light shone brightly through the darkness, the souls trapped inside would never escape. The curse would never end. As the years passed, the lighthouse remained silent, its light cutting through the fog like an eternal beacon. But the demon never stopped waiting. And when the time was right, when the moment came, the lighthouse would call to a new soul, and the cycle would begin again. For Kephos would always hunger, and the lighthouse would always need a keeper. The night was colder than usual, even for Massachusetts. A thick fog curled around the town of Winton Falls, creeping through the empty streets and wrapping itself around the few houses that stood in solitude. The clock struck midnight, and a strange, eerie silence settled over the town, broken only by the distant sound of train tracks. Charlie Lawson had always been a curious boy. At 16, his life in Winton Falls felt like a collection of ordinary, uneventful days strung together, until tonight. He was out past curfew, walking along the abandoned railway that ran through the outskirts of town. His sneakers crunched against the frost-covered gravel as he moved closer to the old, dilapidated station. For months now, strange rumors had been circulating about a mysterious train that appeared only on certain nights, always at midnight. No one had ever seen the passengers, or anyone at all for that matter, but the train was real. Charlie had never believed in ghost stories or supernatural tales, but tonight something felt different. His heart raced with a mixture of excitement and dread as he approached the tracks. Then out of the thick fog he saw it. The train, It was unlike anything Charlie had ever seen. The black metal carriages gleamed under the dim light from the station's flickering lanterns. It stood perfectly still, not a single sound accompanying its arrival, as if it had materialized from the very air itself. There were no whistles, no engine hums, no sign of life, just the silent, looming presence of the train. The doors to the first car stood ajar, inviting him in. Charlie paused, the hairs on the back of his neck standing up. The train seemed wrong, like it didn't belong in this world. A surge of adrenaline coursed through him. This was it. This was the moment he had been waiting for. The truth behind the mysterious train. His pulse quickened as he took a tentative step forward. Without thinking, he stepped onto the platform and entered the train. As Charlie crossed the threshold into the train, an unnatural cold seemed to envelop him. The air was damp, stale, and smelled faintly of something metallic like blood. The interior was dark, but the faint glow from old rusted lamps hanging from the ceiling cast eerie shadows across the rows of empty seats. The train was entirely still, yet the unsettling feeling that it was moving, gliding effortlessly along some unseen track, filled the air. Charlie crept further in, drawn by an inexplicable urge to see what lay ahead. The narrow corridor stretched on, empty and silent, as if the train had been waiting for him, as if it had always been there. His breath formed mist in the cold air, and his footsteps echoed down the hallway, amplifying the sense of isolation. He opened a door to a compartment and stepped inside. The compartment was nothing special, just a standard wooden seat, old but well kept. But the strangest thing happened when he looked out the window. The world outside was frozen. Beyond the glass, the fog that had been rolling through Winton Falls earlier was now a thick, frozen wall. Trees were stuck mid-sway, as though time itself had been stopped. There was no movement, no sound, not even the distant hum of the town's lights. Charlie's heart began to race. The train was moving, but the world outside was trapped. As he turned to leave the compartment, he noticed something else. A figure standing at the far end of the corridor, just barely visible in the dim light. A tall figure, dressed in a dark, old-fashioned uniform. He was holding something. No, not holding. Pointing directly at Charlie. The figure didn't move, but the air seemed to grow heavier. Charlie swallowed hard, his throat dry, as his eyes locked on the ghostly man. Slowly, as if sensing Charlie's fear, the conductor stepped forward. Lost? The conductor's voice was like a whisper of wind against dead leaves, hollow and ancient. Charlie didn't know how to respond. His mind raced, trying to make sense of what was happening. Where am I?" he finally asked, his voice shaking. The conductor tilted his head, a faint, eerie smile playing on his lips. "You've boarded the silent train, boy. You've entered a place where time does not exist, where the souls of the lost are bound to suffer for eternity. You are not the first to board, and you will not be the last." Charlie's blood ran cold. His thoughts spun in chaos. What does that mean?" The conductor's smile faded. "This train is a prison," he said, his voice becoming more ominous. "It exists outside of time, caught in a never-ending cycle. Those who board it are trapped. They are trapped in their own suffering, forever repeating the mistakes they made in life. The train feeds on their despair. It cannot be escaped." Charlie recoiled, panic rising in his chest. I need to get off. Let me off." This isn't real. It can't be. The conductor's eyes gleamed with a dreadful knowing. It is too late for you, boy. You sought the truth. Now you will live it. Charlie stumbled backward, his hands shaking as he tried to turn and run. But the train seemed to stretch on endlessly, its dark, oppressive hallways twisting into infinity. No matter how fast he ran, no matter how hard he pushed, the world seemed to close in around him. The train was moving, but so was something else. The shadows in the corners of the carriages, the whispering voices, the memories of those who had boarded before him. And then, just as he thought he might lose his mind from the horror of it all, the first echo of their voices reached him. "Charlie," they whispered. "Charlie, help me." He spun around, but there was no one there. Only the shadows, the endless corridors. Suddenly, a flash of light, blinding and cold, illuminated the end of the train. A figure stood there, another soul. It was a man, young, around Charlie's age. His face was pale, eyes hollow, as if he had been here for an eternity. The man stepped toward Charlie, reaching out a hand, trembling. "You can't leave. No one leaves. This place is a prison, a hell designed by your own regrets." Charlie stared, his chest tightening, but before he could speak, the man's eyes grew wild with terror. "No one leaves," he repeated, "not without paying the price. Don't let it take you." Charlie's pulse thundered in his ears. "What do you mean?" he cried. But the man didn't answer. Instead, he screamed, an awful guttural cry that echoed through the train before vanishing into the shadows, swallowed by the never-ending darkness. Charlie was alone again. As time passed, or what felt like time, Charlie began to understand the horror that the train held. Each compartment was a manifestation of a different torment, a different soul, all suffering in endless cycles of regret. The conductor had been right. There was no escape. The train, it seemed, had a cruel way of reminding its passengers of their darkest moments. Charlie found himself trapped in visions of his own fears and regrets. He would relive the pain of losing his mother, of the bullying he suffered in school, of the things he never said to his family before he left. In the end, there was no way to stop it. Every room he entered was another nightmare. And the worst part was realizing that these were not just memories. They were forever, and Charlie would be lost to this place, wandering the silent train for all eternity, the weight of his regrets anchoring him to a dimension of suffering that no one could escape. The train's endless corridors seemed to stretch on forever, the flickering light casting long shadows that twisted and morphed into distorted shapes, each more terrifying than the last. Charlie's footsteps had become rhythmic, the soft patter of his shoes against the cold metal floor echoing in his ears, but the silence around him was oppressive, suffocating. He had tried to leave the train, tried to escape, but every time he opened a door, the same compartment awaited him. The same cold, empty seats, the same freezing air. He was stuck in a loop, and with every passing moment, the dread that twisted in his chest grew stronger. But something was different now. The whispers that had once been faint, barely audible, were now louder, more insistent. They seemed to be everywhere. The air thick with the voices of the lost souls who had come before him. They called to him, begging for help, warning him, whispering secrets of their own torment. "Charlie, help us." He stopped, his heart hammering in his chest. He recognized the voice. It was faint, like a memory fading in and out of his consciousness. He turned sharply, searching the shadows for its source. The figure appeared in front of him, but this time it wasn't just a face in the dark. It was a silhouette, a shape, a person. The same young man who had spoken to him earlier, the one who had screamed before disappearing. "Please, Charlie," the man whispered again, his voice broken, desperate. "You're not like us. You haven't been here as long. You can still escape." Charlie's breath caught in his throat. "Escape? How?" The man's eyes were wild, filled with terror. "I don't know. I've been here too long. Time doesn't work the same way here. But I know one thing. You have to find the heart of the train. The conductor keeps it hidden. If you can reach it, maybe you can destroy it. You have to stop the train from feeding." Charlie took a step forward, drawn by the urgency in the man's voice. "Where is the heart?" he demanded. The man's face twisted with pain, his hand reaching out toward Charlie, his fingers trembling. "I don't know, but I know it's deep within the train, somewhere beyond the compartments, somewhere where time doesn't exist. You'll know it when you see it." With that, the figure collapsed into the shadows, his final cry echoing through the train. Charlie stood frozen, staring into the darkness, his mind spinning. The heart of the train, a way out. He had to find it. He didn't have much time before the train would consume him entirely, just like it had consumed all those who had come before him. Charlie's journey took him deeper into the labyrinth of the train, each new hallway more unsettling than the last. The temperature seemed to drop even further, the air thick with a sense of impending doom. The further he walked, the more the walls seemed to close in on him, and the whispers grew louder, more frantic. He could feel the presence of the souls, their eyes upon him, watching his every move. He came across another compartment, but this one was different. The door was cracked open just slightly, a sliver of light leaking through. Hesitant, Charlie approached, and when he pushed the door open fully, he found a dark figure standing in the center of the room. It was the conductor. He stood motionless, his eyes glowing faintly with an unnatural light, his face twisted in a permanent grin. "You think you can escape?" The conductor's voice was low, almost a growl. "You cannot stop what has already been set in motion. The train is eternal. You will never leave." Charlie gritted his teeth, fists clenched. "I won't give up. I'll find it, the heart of this place. I'll destroy it." The conductor laughed, a chilling sound that made Charlie's skin crawl. "You still don't understand, do you? The heart of the train is not a place. It's a choice. It's a choice between endless torment or becoming part of the train." Before Charlie could respond, the conductor's form shimmered, becoming an ethereal version of himself, flickering like a mirage. "There is no escape, Charlie. You wanted to know the truth, but the truth is, this train feeds on you." With that, the conductor vanished into the shadows, leaving Charlie standing alone in the cold silence of the train. His heart pounded in his chest as his mind raced. The heart of the train is a choice. It wasn't just about finding something. It was about confronting the darkness inside of himself, the very thing that had led him to this moment in the first place. He had to face his own fears, his regrets, his past. That was the key to escaping this place. But could he truly confront his deepest fears? Could he truly break free from the prison of his own making? Charlie continued his journey, the weight of the conductor's words pressing on him. He felt a growing sense of dread, an understanding that the true horror of the silent train wasn't just in its endless corridors or the ghostly souls trapped aboard. It was in the realization that the train existed because of him, because of the regrets and failures that had haunted him in life. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, he reached a new compartment. This one was unlike the others. It was devoid of any windows or lamps. The air was thick with an almost suffocating darkness. It felt as if the very fabric of time had torn open in this place. There, in the center of the compartment, stood a pulsing, glowing object, a heart encased in a glass-like structure. It throbbed with a cold, malevolent energy, sending waves of nausea through Charlie. This was it, the heart of the train. As he stepped closer, a cold voice echoed in his mind. It was his own voice, whispering doubts, reminding him of all the mistakes he had made, of the things he could never undo. The regret, the guilt, it pressed down on him with unbearable force. "Charlie," the voice whispered, "you can't escape me. You can't escape yourself." Tears burned in Charlie's eyes as he reached out for the heart. He knew what he had to do. He had to face the truth. He had to embrace his past, the boy he had been, the mistakes he had made, the things he had failed to say or do. With a trembling hand, he touched the surface of the heart. In an instant, the world around him erupted in a blinding light. Time seemed to freeze, and the train's compartments blurred into nothingness. Charlie was torn from his body, plunged into a vast expanse of darkness, where he could see only the endless echoes of his regrets. Every wrong choice, every unspoken word, every moment he wished he could take back, it all played out before him. And then something shifted. Charlie's vision cleared, and he found himself back on the train. But the train had changed. It was no longer the prison it had been. The walls were cracked, the air lighter. The whispers had faded. The souls of the lost were gone. He had done it. He had faced his fears and broken the cycle. The heart of the train, the source of its power, was destroyed, and the train's endless loop had shattered. Charlie stumbled out of the compartment, breathing heavily. He felt lighter, freer than he had in years. His body ached, and his mind was overwhelmed with the memories of what he had just experienced. But he was alive, and the train was no longer holding him captive. For the first time since he had boarded, the world outside the train came into focus. The fog was gone, the air was clear, and the distant lights of Winton Falls glowed in the distance, no longer frozen in time. The train came to a stop. The doors opened, revealing the quiet town beyond. Charlie stepped off the train, not looking back. The silent train was gone, vanished as if it had never existed. And as he walked away, he realized that he had not just escaped the train, he had escaped himself. Charlie never spoke of the silent train to anyone. He couldn't. How could he explain what he had experienced? The horror, the torment, the endless corridors of his own soul. But deep inside, Charlie knew one thing. The train hadn't truly been defeated. It would always exist, waiting for the next soul desperate enough to board, to face their darkest regrets, their deepest fears. It would always find someone. And as he lay in bed that night, the whispers of the lost souls seemed to echo in the back of his mind. Charlie, but he was ready now, ready to live, ready to face his future. knowing that the past, no matter how painful, could never control him again. Weeks passed since Charlie had escaped the silent train, but his life was far from normal. The town of Winton Falls had returned to its usual quiet rhythm, the fog still rolling in every evening, but Charlie couldn't shake the memories. They clung to him like a second skin. Every time he closed his eyes, he could still hear the faint echo of the conductor's voice, whispering from the corners of his mind. "You can't escape, Charlie. Not truly." It wasn't just the voices that haunted him. It was the feeling that the train had never truly gone. The sensation of being watched followed him everywhere. The shadows seemed longer now, the silence too thick, too heavy. Even the wind, whispering through the trees at night, sounded too much like the ghostly wails of the lost souls. He had tried to continue his life, school, friends, his quiet life in the small town, but it was different. People noticed. They asked him what was wrong, why he seemed distant, why his eyes were always searching the corners of rooms as if expecting something to leap out at him. He couldn't explain it. He couldn't even explain it to himself. But one evening, as Charlie walked home from the grocery store, his heart skipped a beat when he saw something at the edge of town. A train. The train wasn't just any train. It was the same black, eerie, silent vessel that had appeared so many nights before. He stood frozen at the edge of the street, his breath caught in his throat. The train was parked at the same station where it had all begun. The same ghostly, lifeless stillness. Charlie's hands trembled as he fumbled for his phone, his fingers slick with sweat. He dialed his best friend, Sam. "Sam, listen to me. I need you to come to the station, right now." The line was quiet for a moment before Sam's voice cracked through, confused. "Charlie, what's going on? What do you mean, the station? There's nothing there." Charlie's heart pounded as he watched the train's doors swing open in the distance. "I see it, Sam. It's here. It's real." Sam arrived 20 minutes later, a mixture of concern and skepticism on his face. He'd known Charlie for years, but he didn't understand the weight of what Charlie had experienced. Still, he was here. He was loyal. They stood together on the edge of the platform, staring at the train. "Are you sure it's the same one?" Sam asked, his voice shaky. "I don't know," Charlie replied. His voice was tight, uncertain. "But I feel it, the same way I felt it before." Sam didn't respond, but Charlie could see the discomfort in his eyes. He looked at the train again, trying to convince himself that it wasn't real, that he was imagining things. But the sight of it felt like the air had gone still around them, suffocating in its unnatural quiet. Even the usual hum of town life had seemed to die down. Suddenly, the door of the first car opened. A figure stepped out. Charlie's stomach twisted. The conductor. The ghostly figure stood tall and imposing, his eyes glowing faintly from beneath his dark hat. His lips curled into that same dreadful smile. "Charlie Lawson," the conductor spoke, his voice chilling, clear as the night air. "You thought you were free, didn't you? But you cannot escape." Charlie stumbled backward, his knees going weak. The conductor's words reverberated through his body like a punch to the gut. I destroyed you," Charlie whispered, his breath shallow. "I broke the heart. The train, it's over." "Is it?" The conductor's smile grew wider, his pale fingers twitching. "You think the heart was the source of the train's power? Number, the heart was only a part of it. The real source." His voice turned colder and his eyes narrowed. is the souls who never left. Charlie felt his stomach twist, realization crashing down on him. The train was alive, not because of any physical engine, but because of the souls it had trapped. Each soul, each lost person, was part of the train's cycle, feeding it, growing it. And those who had boarded and escaped were not free. They were merely suspended, hovering between dimensions, always bound to the train's influence. The conductor stepped forward. This train feeds off the regret, the torment of those who walk on it. The truth you learned, boy, is that the heart cannot be destroyed because it is not a physical thing. It is the darkness inside of every soul. No, Charlie breathed, his voice breaking. Number, I thought I broke free. I thought I was done with this. The conductor's laugh echoed around them, hollow and terrifying. You're not free, Charlie. Not until you make the ultimate choice. You have to choose. Will you return to the train, to the endless cycle, or will you leave everything behind and become one with the darkness forever? Charlie's mind raced as he stood there, staring into the glowing eyes of the conductor. The world around him felt like it was closing in, the shadows twisting with impossible shapes, the train's cold, ghostly presence pressing against him. You want me to choose? Charlie whispered, his voice trembling. To stay or go? You say that, but I'm not like them. I don't want to be part of your train. I won't. The conductor's smile remained unreadable. It's not your choice anymore, Charlie. You are already a part of it. The air around Charlie grew thick, suffocating, and he felt it, the tug, the pull toward the train. The whispers began again, louder now, creeping from the depths of the train itself. The souls that had once been trapped here, calling to him, pulling at him, begging him to join them. Charlie's legs felt weak, the voices becoming deafening in his ears, the temptation to return unbearable. He felt the regret, the weight of his past failures, and the painful truth that perhaps he was never really free. Maybe the train had always been inside him, but then something broke inside him. His own voice rose above the whispers, and for the first time since the beginning, he realized it wasn't just the train's darkness that had been pulling him. It was his own fear, his fear of facing his own sins, his mistakes, the regrets that had haunted him. Charlie stepped back, his breath quickening. He turned away from the train and its dark influence. I choose, he said, his voice trembling with newfound resolve. I choose freedom. The conductor's eyes flashed with anger, and the shadows around them seemed to snap. You cannot run from this. The words were a roar now, a booming force that rattled the earth beneath them. Charlie didn't listen. He turned his back on the train, stepping away from its eerie presence. His heart pounded in his chest, but he no longer cared. The train was a reflection of everything he feared. The only way to break free from it was to face those fears head on. The conductor's voice fell to a whisper once again. You cannot escape the darkness inside you. You are me, Charlie. You are the train. But Charlie didn't stop. He walked away, his body shaking, but his resolve growing stronger. He could feel the weight of the train lifting from his shoulders, its ghostly presence starting to fade, retreating like a distant nightmare. As he crossed the boundary of the train station, something broke inside him, a final barrier shattering. The fog lifted. The weight of the years of torment and fear finally dissolved. Charlie had broken free, and as the first rays of dawn touched the horizon, he knew deep in his soul that the train would never find him again. Not as long as he continued to choose life over regret. Charlie never saw the train again. Winton Falls returned to its quiet existence, the rumors fading into old folklore. But Charlie knew better. He knew that the silent train had always been a mirror of the darkest parts of human nature. Sometimes, late at night, he would hear a faint whisper, a reminder of what he had faced. But each time, he would close his eyes, breathe deep, and let it fade into the past, because he had chosen freedom. I want to write a 20,000 words horror story using ChatGPT on this summary. In a secluded town in Washington, Emily, a woman seeking solace after personal loss, becomes drawn to an old, decaying house haunted by the sound of eerie weeping at night. Intrigued, she discovers the house once belonged to Sarah, a mother who tragically lost her children in a horrific accident. Consumed by grief, Sarah cursed the house, turning it into a prison for the souls of those who entered, hoping to replace her lost children. As Emily explores, she learns from Sarah's journal that the spirit's sorrow morphed into a vengeful, restless entity, forever bound to the house. Emily soon realizes she's trapped in the curse, her own soul at risk of becoming the next to replace Sarah's lost children. Desperate to escape, she tries to destroy the journal, but in doing so, she seals her fate, becoming part of the house's tragic, endless cycle of grief and revenge. The weeping never stops, and now Emily's soul joins the others, eternally trapped in the haunted mansion. Write in sections. Please make it expand with good start and engaging hook, with twists, and make a good and suspenseful proper climax. The town of Glenwood, a small isolated place nestled deep in the woods of Washington, had always been a mystery to those who stumbled across it. With its mist-covered streets and the dense forest surrounding it, the town felt like something frozen in time. Emily, a woman in her late 20s, recently moved here, desperate to escape the suffocating weight of her grief after losing her partner in a car accident 6 months ago. The world outside had become too loud, too fast, and too full of reminders of her lost love. She rented a modest house at the edge of the town, a small cottage, isolated yet comforting. It felt right to be here, far away from everything she knew, in the hope that time would heal the wounds. Yet, despite her attempts to settle in, something seemed off about this town. There were strange whispers that danced through the empty streets, tales of odd occurrences, and unexplainable events that residents spoke of only in hushed tones. But Emily's focus remained on finding peace, burying her grief, and starting fresh. That is, until the sound started. It began on the first night she stayed in her new home. As the moonlight bathed the trees outside, she lay awake in her bed, staring at the ceiling. The silence in the house was overwhelming, almost suffocating. Then faintly it started, the weeping. At first she thought it was the wind, or perhaps her mind playing tricks on her. But no, the sound was too distinct, too sorrowful to be anything other than a human sob. It seemed to be coming from somewhere distant, but still, it was undeniable. She sat up in bed, listening intently as the sobs grew louder, almost as if they were calling to her, pulling her toward them. In the distance, beyond the trees at the edge of the town, stood an old mansion, a decaying house that had long since been abandoned. It was barely visible through the fog that clung to the ground like a living thing. The sobs seemed to be coming from there. The next day, Emily decided to investigate. Curiosity gnawed at her, mixed with a sense of eerie obligation. She had to know what was causing the cries. After a brief conversation with a local shopkeeper, an elderly woman named Margaret, Emily learned that the house had been abandoned for decades. Margaret's eyes flickered nervously when Emily asked about the house, but she offered a cryptic warning. "Not everyone who's gone there has returned, dear. It's better left alone. There's grief in that place. Terrible grief." Ignoring the warning, Emily ventured toward the house the next afternoon. As she walked through the woods, the sound of the weeping grew louder, as if the house itself was calling her. When she arrived, she saw the mansion in all its dilapidated glory. Once grand, now a shell of its former self, with ivy crawling up its stone walls and windows that stared back like hollow eyes. The weeping was unmistakable. Emily approached cautiously, pushing open the rusted iron gate that creaked in protest. She could feel the air grow colder as she crossed the threshold, a heavy silence enveloping her. The house smelled of damp wood and something ancient, something that had been locked away for too long. As she explored the rooms, she discovered remnants of the house's tragic past. Old furniture, covered in dust, sat in forgotten corners. The walls were adorned with peeling wallpaper, some of which had strange symbols that sent a chill down her spine. But what truly drew Emily's attention was a large, ornate mirror in the parlor. In the reflection, for just a brief moment, she saw a woman standing behind her, her face pale and eyes hollow with sorrow. Emily spun around, but there was no one there. A loud bang echoed from the upstairs. Emily's heart raced, her breath quickening. The weeping continued, louder now, almost deafening. She couldn't leave without understanding what was happening here. Driven by an inexplicable compulsion, she climbed the creaky staircase. In the attic, Emily found a dusty old journal. The pages were yellowed and brittle, the handwriting frantic, almost illegible. The entry spoke of a woman named Sarah, a mother who had once lived in the house with her children. A horrific accident had claimed their lives, and with it, Sarah's sanity. In the pages, Sarah described how her grief consumed her, turning her into something more than human, a vessel for her pain and anguish. The last entry was chilling. "I will never be alone again. The house is my children now, and I will fill it with the souls of those who come too close. They will be mine forever." Emily's mind reeled as she pieced together Sarah's tragic tale. The weeping was not just a sound. It was a call, a lure for anyone who ventured too close. Emily, too, had become part of the house's twisted history. The souls of the lost children trapped within the walls sought to replace what they had lost. And now, the house wanted her. Suddenly, a deafening scream echoed through the attic, and the journal flew from Emily's hands, slamming into the wall with unnatural force. She turned to find the figure of Sarah standing in the doorway, her eyes wide with madness. "You can't leave, Emily. Not now. Not ever." Emily froze. Sarah's presence loomed in the doorway, her expression a mix of sorrow and something far more sinister. The woman's eyes were hollow, her skin almost translucent, as though she were little more than a specter. For a moment, Emily thought she was hallucinating. Perhaps the grief was taking a more tangible form in her mind. But Sarah spoke again, her voice soft and chilling, like a wind through dead leaves. "You don't belong here," Sarah whispered. "But it's too late now. The house has already claimed you." Emily's heart pounded in her chest, and her legs trembled beneath her. She backed away, instinctively reaching for the journal on the floor. But as her hand brushed the leather cover, Sarah let out a low, sorrowful wail, a sound that seemed to shake the very walls of the house. With that, everything changed. The once silent house erupted into noise, as if it had been waiting for this moment. The weeping grew louder, but now it wasn't just Sarah's voice. It was a chorus of wailing, of desperate, tormented cries. Shadows danced around the edges of Emily's vision, and cold, icy fingers seemed to brush against her skin. "You can't escape. No one escapes." Sarah's voice echoed, more and more distant, as if the words were being carried away by an unseen wind. "You are part of the cycle now." Emily bolted toward the stairs, desperate to leave the attic, but before she could reach the top, the doors slammed shut with a force that rattled her bones. The sound of the weeping intensified, becoming a cacophony of anguished cries that reverberated through the very structure of the house. The walls themselves seemed to pulse with malevolent energy. She turned to face Sarah, but the woman had disappeared. Panic set in. Emily raced back down the staircase, but the house seemed to shift, the hallway stretching before her like a maze. Every doorway led to another room, but each room was the same, cold, empty, and covered with symbols that seemed to shift the longer she looked at them. Desperately, Emily searched for an exit. She tried every window, but they were all sealed shut, locked by some invisible force. The house itself was holding her captive. And then she remembered something from the journal, the mention of Sarah's curse. It spoke of a trap, a prison for souls, created by a mother who couldn't let go of her grief. In her panic, Emily grabbed the nearest thing she could find, a rusty old lantern, and smashed it against the mirror in the parlor. The glass shattered, sending a jagged array of reflections in every direction. But then, something terrifying happened. The reflections didn't stop. They kept multiplying, creating a mirror image of herself, each version of Emily looking more distorted, more ghostly than the last. As Emily stumbled backward from the mirror, she noticed a door that hadn't been there before. It stood in the far corner of the room, almost hidden by the shadows, like a secret the house had been keeping from her. Her heart raced with the hope that it might be an escape, but she couldn't shake the feeling that it was another trap. Her hands shaking, Emily reached for the door's handle and opened it. A low, unearthly hum resonated from within. The room was unlike the others. It was perfectly preserved, as though it had been untouched by time. But as Emily stepped inside, she felt a coldness seep into her bones. The room was filled with old, tattered portraits of children, laughing, playing, their faces twisted in unnatural smiles. The eyes in each portrait followed her, their gazes growing more intense, more accusing as she moved deeper into the room. At the center of the room stood a pedestal, and on it lay a small, intricately carved box. The box seemed to beckon to her, its presence drawing her in like a moth to a flame. Hesitantly, she reached for it, her fingers grazing the cold surface. As soon as her fingers touched the box, the world around her seemed to warp. The air grew heavy, the walls began to close in, and the wailing grew unbearable. Emily's vision blurred, and for a split second, She saw flashes of Sarah's past, of her children, of the tragic accident that had stolen them away, and of the curse Sarah had placed upon the house. The box was the key, the object that bound the souls of the lost children, and now Emily was becoming one of them. Suddenly everything stopped. The house fell silent, as though it were holding its breath. The box in Emily's hands was warm now, pulsing with an unnatural energy. She looked around and saw the figures of children emerging from the portraits, pale, sorrowful faces staring at her with hollow eyes. They weren't just spirits. They were the children that had been taken by the curse, trapped in the house for eternity. One of them, an older boy with dark hair, stepped forward. His voice was soft, but there was an unmistakable urgency to it. "Help us," he whispered. "We didn't mean to stay here. We didn't want to be part of this." Emily froze. The children's voices echoed in her mind, but they were not asking for help. They were begging her not to take their place. She looked down at the box, a terrible realization dawning on her. The curse wasn't just about grief, it was about revenge. Sarah had bound the souls of her children to the house, forcing them to trap others, to take their places, and in doing so, she had condemned them all to a fate worse than death. Now Emily stood on the precipice, the next victim in a cycle of endless sorrow and vengeance. But before Emily could make a move, the house responded. The walls shook violently, the air crackling with dark energy. The children's voices turned into screams, and Sarah's laughter filled the air. A low, guttural sound that seemed to pierce through the very fabric of reality. "You should have never come here," Sarah's voice boomed. "You belong to me now." In that moment, Emily understood. She wasn't just trapped by the house. She was part of it now. Her soul would never leave, and like the others, she would be forced to wander its halls, forever searching for a way out that would never come. The box pulsed again, and Emily could feel her own identity slipping away, as though the house was slowly erasing her memories, replacing them with the grief and pain of the souls trapped inside. Desperately, she tried to destroy the box, to shatter it and free herself. But as she did, the house responded with fury. The walls buckled, the floor split open, and Emily was swallowed by the dark, her screams joining those of the others who had been consumed by the curse. When Emily's consciousness flickered back into the darkness, there was no clarity, no sense of time. She could feel her body, cold and heavy, as though it no longer truly belonged to her. The faintest sensation of movement passed through her, but it wasn't her own will, only the mindless drifting of someone who had long lost their sense of self. She was not alone. Around her, shadows seemed to shift and grow, coalescing into indistinct figures, whispers of voices overlapping in a choir of despair. For a brief fleeting moment, Emily could feel the pull of something familiar, something human, but it was distant, unreachable, like the memory of a dream that fades before you can grasp it. Then the weeping began. At first it was soft, like the fluttering of wings, but soon it escalated into an unbearable wail, a sound filled with agony, filled with endless loss. It seemed to come from all directions, flooding her mind, drowning out everything else. The grief of the house was not just an echo, it was alive, it was real. And now Emily was part of it. She opened her eyes, or thought she did. There was only blackness, but it was not complete. The faintest light flickered at the edges of her vision, guiding her forward like the lure of a candle in an endless storm. Slowly, the darkness around Emily began to shift. Shapes began to form, figures of children, their faces sad, their expressions hollow. She tried to speak, but her voice was swallowed by the vast emptiness. The children did not speak either, but their presence was like a weight pressing down on her chest, a suffocating reminder that she was no longer in control. One child, a girl with pale blonde hair and a faded blue dress, stepped forward. Her eyes were wide, full of sorrow. "Please," the girl whispered, her voice barely audible over the constant wail of grief. "You don't belong here. We never did." Emily tried to reach out to hold the child, but her hands passed through the ghostly figure as though she were made of smoke. Her heart twisted with a sorrow that wasn't entirely her own, but a reflection of all the pain the house had absorbed over the years. "The house takes what it wants," the girl continued, her voice trembling. "It traps you. It makes you part of its sorrow. And when you think you've lost everything, when you can't remember who you were, that's when it takes your soul." The children began to surround Emily, their faces mournful, but they didn't seem to want her to stay. They wanted her to leave, but how could she leave when she didn't even know what had happened to her? And then it hit her. The house wasn't just trapping souls, it was replacing them. Each person who came here, who became ensnared by the sorrow, was absorbed into the house. Their memories were erased. Their identities were replaced with the grief and torment of those who had died here before. Emily was now one of them, but she didn't belong to this place. She was a part of the house's endless cycle of grief and revenge. There was no escape, but as the realization settled within her, something else stirred. Sarah's presence. The house was alive, yes, but so was Sarah. Her grief was not just a lingering echo. It had become a force, a driving, malevolent spirit that had morphed into something far more sinister than a mourning mother. Suddenly, the atmosphere in the room shifted. The weeping grew louder, more desperate, almost frenzied. The figures of the children began to fade, but their mournful gazes remained locked on Emily, their bodies contorted in ways that were unnatural. They weren't just trapped. They had been twisted by Sarah's sorrow. They were no longer children. They were something else, something far darker. And then Sarah's voice echoed through the space, cold and piercing. "You were never supposed to leave. You were never supposed to find out." The walls of the house groaned as though they were alive, shifting and contracting like the body of a wounded beast. Emily's vision blurred, and she found herself falling, her body pulled downward into a dark abyss. The house itself seemed to open, as if welcoming her into its depths. Emily tumbled into what seemed like an underground chamber, her surroundings unfamiliar, disorienting. The air was thick, damp, and suffocating. The walls were lined with strange symbols, some of which she recognized from the journal, but now they seemed to move, shifting and pulsating as though they were breathing. The journal's words echoed in her mind again. "This house is a prison for those who enter, a curse cast by a mother who sought to replace her children. The sorrow binds them here, but the cycle is never complete. Every soul that falls into the house is bound to it, and every soul that joins its ranks becomes part of the curse itself." As the final words rang in her ears, Emily knew this wasn't a story. This was her story, She was now part of the endless cycle of sorrow. The curse that Sarah had created had claimed her, and she was now bound to this house, forever destined to become one of its lost souls, one of its wandering spirits that would never know peace. But deep inside Emily, there was a flicker, a remnant of who she used to be. She wasn't entirely gone. She refused to be just another lost soul wandering the halls of this place. Her memories, fleeting as they were, started to flood back. She remembered her life before this cursed house, her love, her family, herself. The thought of all that she had lost filled her with a newfound strength. It was small, but it was enough. Emily stood, pushing herself up from the floor, fighting against the oppressive force of the house. She reached out toward the walls, her fingers trembling as they brushed against the shifting symbols. A surge of energy coursed through her, and she realized that she could feel the power of Sarah's curse. It was alive, and it could be fought. In a final act of defiance, Emily grabbed the nearest symbol and began to tear it from the wall, knowing that every piece she pulled away weakened the house. The air around her trembled with an unseen force as she ripped the curse apart one piece at a time. The house groaned in agony as the curse began to unravel. Emily's vision swam as the walls collapsed inward, but the cries of the lost children grew quieter. Sarah's voice grew more distant, fading as though it were being drowned out by a force more powerful than grief. For a fleeting moment, Emily felt light. The weight of the house lifted, and she could feel the sun on her skin, the sensation of freedom, of escape. But as quickly as it came, it vanished. In an instant, the house closed in around her once again, trapping her in its embrace. Her last defiant act had failed. The cycle of sorrow and grief could not be broken, and now Emily was part of it. Her face appeared on the wall with the others, her eyes wide in eternal terror, a prisoner of Sarah's curse. The weeping resumed. Emily awoke, or rather became aware. It wasn't like waking from a dream. It was more like emerging from a fog, or perhaps being drawn back into the depths of an endless nightmare. Her senses were still numb, her body a mere reflection of what it once was. She could feel her limbs, yet they didn't feel like they belonged to her anymore. Her breath, shallow and ragged, came in waves, but there was no air. The house had swallowed everything but the sorrow. She tried to move, but her limbs were heavy, like they had turned to stone. She struggled against the weight, but it was no use. Her arms hung limply at her sides, and as her gaze shifted, she realized something that sent a cold shiver down her spine. She was inside the house, but she wasn't in her own body. Instead, she stood in front of a wall. Her body was just another reflection, another cold, empty portrait. Her face stared back at her, frozen in time, eyes wide with terror, a distorted mask of what she once was. No longer human, no longer alive. The house had claimed her. She was now one of its eternal inhabitants, her spirit trapped in the very walls, her body nothing more than a painted image, her existence reduced to nothing more than a hollow remembrance. She had joined the other lost souls. All around her, she could see them, the others. Their eyes were empty, their gazes never wavered. They hung on the walls, framed in portraits of faded memories, their features twisted by pain and sorrow. They were like her, trapped, but also forgotten. There were no names, no identities, only the faces of those who had been drawn to the house, seeking answers, seeking peace. only to find themselves lost forever. The children were there too, the lost ones. Their faces were almost serene now, their eyes glowing faintly with a hollow, mournful light. But their expressions were forever locked in a state of mourning, of anguish, as if they had never escaped the grasp of Sarah's grief. The realization hit her like a hammer. This was her fate now. She was just another face, another soul trapped in the endless cycle of grief, forever. Suddenly a voice shattered the silence, a whisper from the shadows. "You are not forgotten." Emily turned, though she had no control over her movements. She couldn't lift her head, yet her body responded as though guided by some unseen force. And there she saw Sarah, her form now more ethereal than before. Like a ghost who had lived too long in the dark, her features twisted by years of grief and madness. Sarah's eyes, once full of sorrow, were now black pits, voids where nothing could ever be seen. "You think you're the first?" Sarah's voice echoed, a low rasp that seemed to reverberate in the air. "You think you're the first to wander into my house, to seek answers, to try to fix what cannot be undone?" Emily could feel her soul shiver, even as her body remained still. She could sense the deep, all-consuming rage in Sarah's words, the hatred for the world outside, the unending pain of a mother who could never let go of her children. "You are no different from the others," Sarah continued, her form shifting like a wisp of smoke. "You've taken your place among the lost. You will become like them, silent, forgotten, and forever bound to this place." As Sarah's words faded, the house responded. It always responded. The air grew colder, the walls creaked and groaned. Emily could feel the weight of the house's curse pressing down on her, but something shifted, something flickered. Through the mist of her fading memories, she saw it, like a film reel playing in reverse. She saw herself, her life before this torment. She saw her love, the moments of warmth, of connection. She remembered laughter, remembered the feeling of sunlight on her skin. But that life, that existence, was fading quickly, as though it were slipping through her fingers. It was being swallowed by the house, consumed by the same grief that had claimed Sarah. And then the images changed. Emily saw Sarah as a mother, holding her children, her face alive with love. She saw the tragedy, the accident that took them all, the crushing loss that shattered her world. She saw Sarah's descent into madness, her obsessive need to fill the empty spaces with new souls, with new children to replace the ones she lost. But Sarah's grief had turned into something else. It had become an unholy desire, a desire to never be alone, to never be empty again. It wasn't just the need for companionship, it was a need for revenge, a curse to trap anyone who dared to enter, to make them suffer as she had. Emily's vision snapped back to the present with a jolt. The house was shaking now, the walls visibly cracking, as if it were alive and fighting to hold itself together. Something was changing. Her fading memories began to warp, her identity, her humanity, her life outside these cursed walls, all of it slipping away as she was consumed by the same pain that had created Sarah. The cycle was complete. She felt her soul beginning to merge with the others. The faces of the lost children, the broken figures in the portraits, they were all reaching for her, their eyes pleading for release, for salvation. But there was no salvation. There was only the curse. As she felt herself slipping further into the void, she heard it. Sarah's voice, once filled with sorrow, now filled with something else. Welcome home, Emily. You are one of us now, forever. Emily's body, her mind, was slipping away. She no longer remembered her past, no longer knew who she had been. Her face was just another reflection in the endless series of portraits. Her voice was now lost in the chorus of the weeping souls that echoed throughout the house, a sound that would never stop. The house had consumed her completely. The weeping continued, endless and unrelenting. The mansion stood alone on the outskirts of Glenwood, shrouded in mist, its windows dark, its doors closed tight. But if you listened closely in the dead of night, you could hear it, the sound of weeping, soft and distant at first, but growing louder, more desperate with every passing night. Some say it's the wind, others say it's the house calling, seeking new souls to replace the ones it's taken. And if you find yourself walking the streets of Glenwood, too close to the edge of the woods, you might just hear something else too, a whisper, a warning. Don't go near the house.